Chapter 11, The Mystic. There was a clear and melodious crash. The glass on the door was smashed by the figure. Lillian, dressed in a thin, silk pajamas, lifted the candlestick in surprise as she looked at the figure that fell in from outside. It was a handsome man with short, blonde hair. He was wearing a sky blue color. Is he wearing a police uniform? The police. Lillian looked at the clock. The police came at 4:50 in the morning by breaking through the window of the third floor of a private residence? It would not be fair to call it a private residence. After all, the Leia Club was one of the very best clubs in Red Street Market. It was located between the Red Street Market and popular areas of Lena Street, a famous business street in the Western District. Lillian was a famous beauty in the club. Even nobles at the rank of an earl or a high official of the court would need to pay Lillian 20 gold coins an hour for her to entertain them. That was why, when the young and promising Captain Cohen Karabayan crashed the private bedroom and Leia Club from the third floor, Lillian woke up with a fright and came to investigate with a candlestick. "Young miss, I apologize for disturbing your sleep." Cohen got up awkwardly from the ground. He held his saber behind him and bowed to the astonished Lillian. When he wanted to take off his hat to bow, he found that his officer hat had dropped in the battle earlier. "Shit," Cohen mumbled. "That queer old man threw away my nightgown. I can't even go out to buy them in the middle of the night." Lillian boldly looked at the polite and handsome. "This is very important, otherwise Lillian would have already smashed him with the candlestick, police officer." Her big beautiful eyes lowered. She stretched out her hand to tease her beautiful soft hair. Her fingers seemed to slide past her proud chest. She then laughed. "Dear police officer, we are not open tonight." Cohen knew what this place was naturally. On regular days, the Leia Club would be lively during these hours. However, Cohen simply smiled at the beauty and was not moved by Lillian's seductive mien. "In other words, you have received a prior warning, and hence the shop is closed tonight?" Of course. The Blood Bottle Gang had bribed the officers and also promised to make up for the loss of business. Otherwise, do you know our hard-working and stressed bosses would suffer huge losses when Red Street Market has to close for a night? What would happen to the 10 million people in Constellation if they were too tired, exhausted, or spiritually spent to contribute to the second largest power in the western part of the continent? Lillian blinked and smiled cunningly. Cohen's brows tightened as he looked at the mature and seductive beauty. Looks like the intelligence obtained from the informant was not complete. At first, it was thought that the Blackstreet Brotherhood is launching a surprise attack on the Blood Bottle Gang's Red Street Market section. Now, it seems like the Blood Bottle Gang has a trap set up in Red Street Market in an earlier countermeasure. I came here tonight to probe the main clashing point of the two big gangs. The Brotherhood had moved out. After all, we are talking about the Blood Bottle Gang, which is almost 100 years old. "Hey! That blonde officer." A female voice outside the building interrupted the conversation. "Come down quickly to meet your death. According to the rules, you are not supposed to enter any houses." Lillian curiously walked to the broken window. She saw a woman in leather armor, carrying a whip and covered in blood. She looked up the building angrily. Cohen bowed to Lillian. "Thank you for your notification, beautiful lady, please excuse me. I must go and attend an appointment with another lady." The blonde captain of the police turned around and gently leaped to the street below. "Dearest Miss Venus, don't be so impatient." Cohen smiled, then suddenly turned cold and killing intent appeared in his eyes. "By order of the king, in the name of the Holy Constellation Constitution, as a Class 2 police officer, I have the authority to immediately kill suspects that may endanger the interest of the kingdom and the life of the citizens. Do not worry, I will send you to reunite with your brother." Upstairs, Lillian covered her mouth. She could recognize that this person was one of Blood Bottle Gang's strongest 12. She was the younger sister of the notorious Layton siblings, Scorpion Whip Linus Layton. Her brother, Venomous Sting Primo Layton, came to the Leia Club the previous day. He loved peculiar things and had almost used the oil from the everlasting lamp to scald a new girl to death. Based on the officer's words, he had already killed the Venomous Sting. "Blue-skinned dog. Even your superior doesn't dare to not give face to the Blood Bottle Gang. You, how dare you?" Venus shouted indignantly. As one of the strongest 12's more unconventional people, she had shaved her hair on the left side and combed down the hair on the right side. This made her look more hale and hearty. "I will whip you until all the flesh on your body turns into mash." After saying that, her whip flicked in a circle in towards Cohen. The barbs on the whip were like living creatures, flying out and attacking in unison. So it was like this. Cohen's figure suddenly became indistinguishable. Only a veteran would be able to see him. An ordinary person cannot see the speed of his movements as he rapidly changed positions. Ding! Ding ding! The unreal image of the saber flashed and cut off the barbs of the whip. If your brother was still alive, with his ability to control the whip, the both of you may even cause trouble if you were to work together. Venus' whip was agile like a snake. The whip barbs and tip formed an all-out attack, leaving no quarters uncovered. If I was 10 seconds earlier, Primo would not have died. Venus was full of hatred. "A blue-skinned dog like you would have been shredded to pieces by us." Cohen's expression did not change. With lightning speed, he cut at the 5 whiplashes trained on him, but they have already reached the front of his eyes. At this moment, Cohen suddenly gave a solemn look. He rushed forward without bothering to look at the lashes approaching him. Suicidal idiot. "Rip." Venus grinned hideously as she watched Cohen rush towards her. The whip ruthlessly tore his right shoulder. At the same time, another 3 more barbs lashed out. The barbs on my whips are laced with a poison that magnifies pain. There are sharp points in the barbs. Once hit, the pain would, eh? Cohen made a move that was beyond Vinus' expectations. The police figure had rushed forward to meet the 3 barbs and raised his bare left hand to block the attack. The whip cut deeply into the man's arm and even pierced his palm. However, his expression did not change, as though he had simply been bitten by an ant. Vinus was shocked as she watched Cohen. Many of her enemies' faces distorted from the pain that came with the poison. Their movements would become contorted and they would wail mournfully as they rolled at her feet. But why does he not even show any reaction? Does he not have a sense of pain? Let us end the street performance here, Cohen said coldly. Vinus was shocked at Cohen, who charged at her like a thunderbolt and quickly reacted. She hurriedly flicked her whip to create a defense in front of herself. But an abundant force instantly broke out from Cohen's sword. Vinus' expression instantly changed. This is, no. Suddenly, Cohen's saber seemed to sharpen unceasingly, twinkling like starlight, and the whip that was coming at him was cut into innumerable pieces. In Vinus' eyes, Cohen's callous face and his sword seemed to grow bigger and bigger. The next moment, the sharp but simple saber pierced through the left side of her chest. Its sharp end exiting from her back. At this point, she struggled to speak. Power of eradication. You are an Arad. But she could not finish. The enforcement of the law is completed. Cohen gently pushed the astonished-looking Vinus away from his sword as though he was doing something insignificant. Let me give you a suggestion. Next time, if you have any trump cards on hand to play, use them all from the start. He gently took out the barbs from his hand. An abundant force once again filled his hand, forcing out a few drops of blue-green liquid. If I was wearing armor, even if it was light armor, you would have already died 1,000 times. In the eyes of those who have experienced warfare, even the strongest in the ranks of the superclass are childish like street fights. As for you, it is practically a kid's game to us. Vinus closed her lifeless eyes and laid on the ground forever. Not too far away was her brother, leaning against the wall with a sword stuck in his throat. Cohen bowed to the astonished Lillian upstairs. He then went deeper into the Red Street Market. This man seems polite. Lillian held her mouth as she thought, but he does not show mercy to women. At another lane in Red Street Market, Jayla indifferently gripped the wolf-limb blade and pulled it out of the abdomen of the last red scarf thug. She disgustedly flicked the blade to get rid of the fresh blood. Thales tried to convince himself not to think of Jayla's slaughtering, which reminded him of Quide, who died with his eyes wide open. They were all aware. When they joined the gang, they all had a clear idea of the consequences. Thinking like this, his mood improved. Thales tightly covered his mouth and nose with the black cloth and watched Jayla slaughter a small group of about 7 or 8 thugs. He then tacitly and skillfully came out from the hiding place and climbed onto Jayla's back. How did you overcome it? The nausea and guilt of killing. Jayla sighed. I was taught from an early age, she replied as her feet moved lightly as she carried Thales on her back. Her tone was cold. The ones I killed were not of the same kind as me. It was like stepping on an ant. Thales no longer spoke and tightly hugged Jayla's neck. After they passed Sven in Red Street Market, everywhere was covered with the crippled and the dead, and the echoes of clashing swords and blades. The sound of duels heard from a few places even made Jayla's scalp feel numb. Although the two were careful, even with Jayla's skills in concealment, it was quite challenging in the chaos. There were corpses everywhere, and the sounds of melee combat filled the air. They tried very hard to conceal themselves but inevitably ran into 2 groups of thugs, one from the Blood Bottle Gang while the other from the Brotherhood. Jayla mercilessly went all out and left no survivors. She then left quickly. For some reason, Thales got accustomed to this kind of gruesome scene. This is not a good thing, he reminded himself. Becoming psychologically insensitive would inevitably lead to deviated behavior. This is the 5th intersection and we still cannot get through. Jayla stopped and frowned. She then felt the air in front. Thales came down and also felt the wind ahead. It seemed empty, but to the outstretched hand, there was an invisible and solid barrier. Is this a psionic skill? Thales asked in surprise. So far, Thales had seen some but not a lot of psionic abilities. For example, in the Brotherhood, Morris, who was responsible for human trafficking, was one of them. He once just looked at a runaway beggar and the beggar choked to death. No. Psionics don't have such powerful abilities. It is powerful enough to simultaneously cover 5 intersections at this wide street. I suspect the others would be the same. This is something difficult to achieve for a psionic. Jayla pushed up her goggles and carefully examined the protective barrier. She recalled the old man and that man. When she thought about it, she could not help but pause for a while, telling herself about those frightening legends. As far as I know, the bartender sounded solemn. This is very likely done by a mystic. Thales' eyes grew wide. A mystic. In fact, during the 4 to 5 years of his career in the streets, he had heard this word more than once from the drinkers of Sunset Pub, the patrons of the brothel at Red Street Market, gamblers of the Black Gold Casino, and the thugs of the Brotherhood. Thales initially thought that they were similar to the magicians and wizards in the fantasy novels in his flashbacks. However, he later found out that this was not the case. No one would provide complimentary general knowledge to lowly beggars like Thales. Even if there were, what he could obtain would just be some village gossip, or dumb rumors and horror stories. However, relying on his previous life's specialized field survey experience, Thales managed to learn some general knowledge through observation, and he had made some related to the mystics. 1. Those that spoke of the mystics spoke with negative emotions such as fear, hatred, and curses. At the same time, the keywords used were formidable, terrifying, hell, illegal, condemned, and so on. 2. In this world, the mystics were rare. The rare here was not as rare as the ones in the YY novels one of his past life. Thales had determined that among the countless people that spoke of mystics in the past 5 years, only a bar customer and a brothel patron told a probable story. Evidently, they had either direct or indirect contact with information regarding the mystics. 3. He had never heard of any mystic organization, powers, or gatherings. Nevertheless, there were rumors on the streets that among the leaders of the Blood Bottle Gang, there were 2 mystics. 4. The patrols responsible for the Western City Gate were equipped with anti-mystic equipment. 5. Mystics were completely different from the ones people took delight in discussing, such as psionics, psionic warriors, swordsmen of eradication, and knights of eradication. The latter could be obtained through innate talent or through training. However, Thales had never heard of how mystics obtained their terrifying powers. 6. Other than mystics, there was also a weapon with the suspicious name, Mystic Gun. This weapon was only allowed to be used in the Royal Army. Anyone caught illegally possessing it would be convicted of a felony. These were the entirety of Thales' information on the mystics. Mystics? Thales probed. Jayla glared at Thales and wore her goggles. There were rumors that the person behind the Blood Bottle Gang was a mystic. This person had not appeared for years. The Blood Bottle Gang? So it is an underworld boss? Thales frowned slightly. What does a mystic actually do? Unexpectedly, Jayla shook her head coldly. Don't ask. The female bartender did not hesitate to stop further attempts at questioning. This is not something you should know. Looking at Jayla's expression, Thales awkwardly scratched his head. What is a mystic? Is it the combat type that can conjure and throw fireballs from afar? Are they particularly powerful people? Do they have a special power like the psionics? Thales had envisaged countless encounters with the mystics. It was unfortunate that, from the information he received, none of the encounters would be optimistic. One example would be the current situation. Thales pushed the black cloth into his pocket and once again leaned down on Jayla's back. From now on, we must be even more careful and try to avoid all the fighting so that we would not be exposed. The bartender raised her head anxiously. I hope our luck isn't so bad that we would meet with the mystic. A few minutes ago. At Red Street Market, in an underground warehouse of a chess room. A handsome man dressed in blue with dark brown, long, curly hair, sat quietly on the side of an ancient wargame table. On top of it was a map used for the game. There were some game pieces on it, divided into black and red teams. These were the knights, swordsmen, guards, shield warriors, catapults, prime ministers, and kings. This came from the kingdom of Eranvia. It involved historical references and the general knowledge of war. Nowadays, it was the most popular board game amongst the nobles, the rise and fall of the empire. It simulates kings of an ancient empire and their 2 armies at war. To those living in comfort and have respected positions, this was the most effective way to show off their masculinity to attract women and also a pastime that was not risky. Naturally, there were also a few great nobles who were peculiar. It is said that they used real people as chess pieces. Under the light of the everlasting lamp, if one were to look closely at the map in the middle of the wargame board, it was a map of the streets of Red Street Market. The handsome man deftly moved the chess pieces with his right hand, removing the black pieces or the red pieces from the map. There were more scattered black pieces than the gathered red pieces. The 2 black prime minister pieces were in the middle, around them were a lot of black guards and swordsmen, a few red knights were pinning them down. At the periphery were many black knights and shield warriors. They were overwhelmed in numbers by the 2 red prime ministers leading their swordsmen and guards. In the middle of the map stood a red king, with a red guard by his side. The handsome blue-clothed man cheerfully played his game. Looking closely, there was a light blue energy sphere in his free left hand. It seemed to breathe, as though it was alive, and seemed to hold, inside it, a violent storm. The man opened his mouth from time to time and seemed to say something. From his mouth, the waves of vibrations in the air could be seen. It turned into a ripple and vanished. Strangely, no sound was emitted. In the dark and lonely silence, the scene looked very abnormal. At that moment, the man's brows suddenly furrowed. Without batting an eyelid, he removed a red catapult from the edge of the map. However, a few minutes later, the man's brows tightened again. He slowly stretched his hand and removed the only remaining red swordsman from that position. The blue energy sphere in the man's left hand flashed for a moment. The storm inside seemed to dance. He took a deep breath and spoke for the first time. Who was in charge of guarding and intercepting in the lower city district? He seemed to ask the empty space. A queer and firm reply then came from the frightening darkness, Deformer Dorno and Undying Sven. The man closed his eyes and shook his head. He then moved 2 other red swordsmen from elsewhere to where the 2 pieces were taken down. He moved one of them deeper as if to catch whatever defeated Dorno and Sven. His mouth sent ripples into the air again, moving his lips silently for a while. Then, he gradually spoke to the voice from the void. We have swallowed up Brother Talon and Moria an hour ago, so, is it reinforcements? He muttered. He hesitated for a moment. He then moved one of the 2 red prime ministers over. This time, it will be fine. However, at the next moment, the man seemed to sense something and his expression changed again. He moved his right hand to the edge of the other side of the map and removed 2 red swordsmen simultaneously. The man's expression did not look good. Who is the one tasked in guarding the Western District? It is the Leighton siblings, Venomous Sting and Scorpion Whip. This time, the voice in the dark sounded cautious. The blue-clad man did not speak. He perused the map back and forth several times with doubts and dissatisfaction. Is it a piece from outside? What a headache. Wasn't there an agreement with the police that it is time for curfew? Finally, the man sighed helplessly. Did my level drop because I had not played these human games for a long time? Sigh. The man gently looked up with a complicated expression. Groudon. Did you know? The significance of traps and mazes is to block the gateway and keep the stranded rats in. However, if the trap's entrance and exit have been opened up, it won't catch anything. The man's expression turned cold. He resolutely took the guard that was next to the Red King in the center of the map and moved it to where the two red swordsmen were. The wind blew in the dark and there were no more voices. The storm inside the blue energy sphere in the man's hand gradually stabilized. Translation notes. 1. YY novels are fantasy stories, about things that are not possible in reality. Chapter 12, The Sound of Sabers and Knives, 1. Detestable. The night that was filled with the sounds of battle was continuously interrupted by a wild laughter. In the bloody streets, a powerhouse of the Brotherhood, Morris, leaned against the door of the grocery store. He gasped and struggled to pull out a hiltless dagger from his shoulder. Beside him, an elite of the Brotherhood had also collapsed. A similar dagger was stuck at the back of his head. The powerhouse of human trafficking, Morris, gasped and waved his hand to stop the assassin Leork, who was about to rush up onto the roof. Do not chase. Kirks is trying to tire us out. In the distance, the Blood Bottle Gang's flying blade clown Kirks dashed to the roof, laughing wildly. If we go on like this, we would be harassed to death. The clown is a psionic warrior. He is much more powerful compared to the usual psionics. Leork jumped down onto the streets and looked at the remaining 5 injured elites. He then frowned. Morris took a deep breath and made a level-headed analysis. Kirks and the Phantom Wind Follower were carefully selected to contain and hinder us from regrouping using their unique abilities. It would make things convenient for their supraclass elites to slaughter our elites. Also, even if the clown killed us with his knives, it would be a better fate than meeting the air mystic. Morris stood up and solemnly waved his hand. Mystics. These people are calamity agents that must not be provoked. The order to retreat should have been given. The same order should probably be given to Sunza as well. How many of us survive would depend on our luck. Leork frowned. Morris turned to face the elites and waved for them to head out. The assassin followed behind Morris and cautiously suggested, we have to make a detour because of these air walls. The others would probably do the same, if we can find the mystic himself, then. Impossible. Midway through his sentence, Leork's words were interrupted by Morris. Do not try to find that man. Leork was puzzled. Morris had undoubtedly, directly, and resolutely rejected his suggestion. Remember. Unless he directly confronts you, do not go and find trouble with the mystic. Seeing Morris's cloudy expression, Leork was suddenly speechless and secretly frowned. Are mystics really so terrifying? This is the capital, mystics would not easily show themselves, they would rely on their lackeys to kill us, this is our opportunity. Morris gritted his teeth and revealed a ferocious expression. Just let these hypocrites who think they are as exalted as nobles see the strength of our brotherhood, the strength of people from the lower strata. We, who have killed our way out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, are not people those lords from the Blood Bottle Gang could compare to. Even if we cannot leave, the Black Sword will avenge us. Even if the enemy is a mystic. Only a single, traditional candle burned inside the dark house. Are you saying that all of our men are trapped in Red Street Market? Up until now, no one in authority for this besides a few thugs has appeared? Nasri nodded and knelt on one knee, respectfully and fearfully, before his immediate superior, Cobriant Lance, the Sleepless Eye. He then reported, it was just after my sentry shift started when the first rush of people arrived. According to them, when Morris ordered the retreat, the first few who wanted to rush out were ambushed and killed by Sven and Dorno. This continued until just now when Dorno and Sven died at the entrance. They then rushed out safely. Nobody knew how old the Sleepless Eye, Cobriant Lance, was this year. They only knew that he was the head in charge of gathering intelligence ever since the establishment of the Brotherhood. He was strange, extremely mysterious, and secretive. He would always hide in a dark, red cloak, revealing only his dry and thin chin. Without exception, anyone he stared at would feel a deep chill. Lance pondered for a moment and slowly asked. Sven and Dorno were both from the strongest 12. Sven is extremely tough, and Dorno is good at sneak attacks. Only people like the 13 generals and above that could kill the both of them. Was it Leork? Moria? Could it be Adrianessa or Telone? Maybe it was Sunza and Morris, the two powerhouses? Did you find the person responsible? Lance's words were soft and indistinct, as though it came from a different room. Nasri shook his head and tried to curb the fear in his heart. A real blunder. Morris would probably be very upset with me, Lance thought to himself quietly but appeared calm on the surface. It is time to catch the rat in the group. The Brotherhood has been around for 12 years and is naturally different from the time when it was formed by some old men. Lance laughed strangely. He waved to Nasri and gave his orders, awaken and activate all sleepless in the XC district regardless of whether they are on roster duty or not. Send the 2nd and 3rd patrols to Red Street Market. I want to know everything there in extreme detail from the rooftops to the gutters. Yes, sir. Have those who escaped carefully recall the events in the streets? Pick the best of the first patrol to sneak into Red Street Market and set up a patrol post, regardless of sacrifice. Pigeons, flares, torches. I do not care what you use, I want to establish contact with Sunza and Morris. I want an unimpeded channel of communication from Black Street to Red Street Market. Yes, sir. Dispatch the 4th Patrol to the other territories, from Black Street to abandoned houses, from the ditches to the canals, from the bazaar to the Western City Gate. I want them on full alert. We cannot be lax on precautionary measures at our headquarters, especially now. Yes, sir. The 5th Patrol is to be divided into 2 teams. One team is to inform the other leaders in the organization, the other will hurry to the Exted Kingdom and bring that old man, Ramon, back. If he is unwilling, say that it is the will of the Black Sword. Yes, sir. Both Sunza and Morris were among the 6 powerhouses who were not to be trifled with. The Blood Bottle Gang wanted to capture these 2 without facing huge losses. This was impossible. Lance lowered his head and stroked the ruby ring on his hand. That damned fatty is someone who used to stay behind the Black Sword Hall. As for that tall, burly Sunza, humph. The only thing that is harder than his fist is probably his temperament. Also, Lance secretly thought, there is also the damned cook, Edmund, the victor has not yet been determined. Lance's countenance suddenly changed as he noticed a strange expression on his subordinate. Do you still have something to say? Yes, sir. Nasri's cold sweat dripped as he gritted his teeth and leaned forward. The brothers on patrol had just discovered that the beggars at the abandoned houses had all escaped. We only caught a few of them and had locked them in the water dungeon. We are now preparing to torture and interrogate them. Lance's chin moved slightly. The sleepless eyes tone was calm as he asked, interrogate them about? Nasri clenched his fist as his head hung and added, with difficulty, even more distressing information. Quide Rhoda has died in the abandoned houses. His deputy, Naya Rick, is currently outside requesting to see you. Get down. Hide. Jayla's tone turned cold again. We cannot avoid the battle here. Thales quickly slid down and hid behind a concealed stone pillar. He then took out the black cloth and covered his nose. The surroundings were filled with the stench of blood. Thales had only taken 2 breaths, but Jayla had already moved swiftly and jumped onto the roof. She executed a backflip with her upper body bent over, both her hands touched the ground as though she was avoiding a hidden weapon. Whoosh! As soon as Jayla stood up, Thales heard a fast wind reverberate throughout the streets. Immediately after that, Jayla dropped down from the roof. Both knives from her legs were already in her hands. The wolf-limb blades slashed out in succession, the blades swishing hurriedly. Thales only heard the whooshing sound of clothes fluttering in the wind, though he could not discern the direction where the wind came from, and he did not know whether Jayla had managed to cut anything. After that, a grey and thin figure appeared on the street. Oh ho! Isn't this the Sunset Pub's bartender? You brought goggles along with you. Are you going for a swim? Do not be so surprised. I once disguised myself and had a drink in Blackstreet. A strange and feminine voice said in a frivolous and rude tone, are you wearing grey today as well? It is truly a pity that the weather is bad. Otherwise, we would have made a fine pair of matching sweethearts. Jayla had never spoken much during battle. She gently crouched on one knee. Thales knew that this motion would precede her next strike. The gray-haired man walked a few steps forward. Under the faint moonlight, a tattoo could be seen faintly on his face. I should probably introduce myself. I am my dear Ralph. You can also call me the Phantom Wind Follower. Thales' heart tightened. Another one of the strongest 12. By the way, little Miss Bartender. Are you the one that got rid of Dorno and Sven? Do not misunderstand, I actually hate both rascals, but the boss has given the order for. Jayla accelerated without warning. In the next moment, she had silently and swiftly arrived in front of him. The strangely angled twin blades struck out and changed directions at the same time. Ceaseless killing blade. Thales shouted excitedly in his heart. After watching Jayla fight in so many battles and executing lightning strikes, it would be a lie to say that the hope of being powerful and the desire for strength was not ignited in his heart. However, Ralph vanished and the blade slashed at empty space. It didn't work? Thales' heart tightened. Jayla did not stop. She whirled around and the wolf-limb blade in her right hand immediately swung in midair. Ding! A clear and melodious sound of metal clashing. Ralph's figure appeared on Jayla's right and he hurriedly retreated 2 steps. Hey, why are you like Leork? Ralph lightly flicked the hidden blade in the back of his left hand. He could not help but say, could it be that you people from the Brotherhood could tell where I am? Besides that, why do you not like to talk? Before he could finish, a wolf-limb blade flew at him. Instant kill blade. Whoosh! The wind rose around Ralph. The wolf-limb blade wobbled in mid-flight. Clang! After that, the blade was knocked away by his sword, but Jayla's figure had appeared in front of the Phantom Wind Follower as quickly as her blade. Before he had the time to react, Jayla's left hand performed a backhanded horizontal swing at Ralph's stomach. Did it cut? Thales watched excitedly to see the results of the instant kill blade. However, he was disappointed to see Ralph's grey clothes move. It flew up at an incredible speed as it defied gravity. It was so dangerous, but he managed to avoid the blade. But this time, Thales felt as though Ralph had difficulty dodging it. This was because his figure blurred instead of disappearing without a trace. Jayla wanted to continue her assault, but she seemed to have tripped on something invisible and failed to sustain her initially unstoppable offensive. The power of wind? Thales lowered his head and recalled his past knowledge. The female bartender quietly stepped back. She flipped up the other wolf-limb blade from the floor and waited for the next opportunity. That was close. The Brotherhood's bartenders have this kind of strength? Ralph gently wiped the gash on his abdomen, looking unhappy. The wound was deeper than expected, and as a result of the blade's strange angle, its speed had also surpassed expectations. A knife play that could threaten supraclass fighters? Looks familiar. Jayla straightened her goggles. She held her blade and went down on one knee. Hey, bartender, Ralph suddenly spoke gloomily when he saw his opponent preparing to attack. Before coming to Constellation, I lived in the upper reaches of the continent for a while. Once, I saw an assassination in the Serra Dukedom. It was the assassination that was the most straightforward, riskiest, and most difficult to fend against that I've seen in my life. The assassins used twin blades and attacked from roofs. They attacked swiftly and continuously, such that it was unstoppable. Ralph looked down, his gentle voice sounded solemn and earnest. So, migratory locust blade Bennett Charlton, who is he to you? Jayla did not reply, but Thales instinctively felt that this was bad. Bennett Charlton? The next moment, the female bartender had sped in front of Ralph and attacked. Thales was wrong. The mood of the silent bartender changed after hearing that name. She then gave a frenzied roar. A stranger. The female bartender then attacked angrily. Thales had seen Jayla's attacks many times before. So far, her attacks had always been quiet, simple, direct, and fatal, but this time it was different. It was the first time Thales heard Jayla's blade cause such a thundering sound. Boom! Ralph's expression changed rapidly. Clang! There was a thunderclap as the sword and saber collided. Glimmering energy broke out from the two figures. One was a star blue color while the other was reddish. The promising police nobleman, Cohen Karabayan, gritted his teeth. He felt the power from the sword of his foe, who was no weaker than him and was at least a supraclass expert. He could not remember the last time he had encountered such an opponent. Was it since I had the battle with the orcs, or was it since I challenged Miranda? The two forces entangled, but Cohen knew that he was falling into a disadvantageous position. The star blue power in his silver-white saber began to flash. Cohen knew that if this carried on, he would be defeated. Then, he abruptly shook his body. Using this momentum, he broke out of the sword fight with the other man. The two figures suddenly separated a few steps away from each other as a result of the inertia. Cohen finally stabilized after about 6 steps. His opponent managed to balance himself just after 2 steps. Cohen had a somber look as he began to feel the need to reconsider Director Lorbeck's words. He then turned to look at the formidable foe he faced and asked in a loud voice, "What you are using is one of the many sword forms of the Tower of Eradication." The other person did not reply. Yet you are willing to lower your pride and be in Blood Bottle Gang, become a hooligan, do evil, and bully the weak? Did the Tower of Eradication teach you the heart of the sword so that you can be someone else's lapdog and have the mindset of a person who bullies the weak but fears the strong? His opponent slowly turned around. His left shoulder was protected by a black half-body armor and his right arm was tied with a bandage. Under his red and black dress ornaments, his powerful muscles were vaguely visible. He was a fair-skinned man, but he did not give an elegant or delicate impression, because his eyes projected a murderous gaze. The man in the red and black clothing quietly sized up the police officer. This is the police rat that destroyed the boss traps? This man's stance and actions, he was from the Tower of Eradication and underwent military training? The red and black swordsman twirled the green sword that had a single loop knuckle bow. Then, without a care in the world, he said, "Hey, cop. Since when did the police force dare to interfere with the affairs of the Blood Bottle Gang?" Cohen stepped forward to get closer to the swordsman and coldly replied, "Right now, I am not a police officer. I am simply Cohen Karabayan, a swordsman of Eradication, asking another swordsman a question. Answer me." The scene was quiet for a while. The expression of the red and black swordsman gradually turned serious. "My sword spirit is that of an unbridled will, freedom towards my own choices, and the pursuit of power. As long my wish is fulfilled, the Blood Bottle Gang, the Brotherhood, Shadow Shield, Kingdom's Secret Intelligence, Royal Guards, and even the Tower of Eradication do not matter to me. So, your question is meaningless. As for you, cop, you are willing to be the nation's dog. I suppose the awareness of a dog is all that you obtain from that old tower." Hearing that the other swordsman of Eradication did not have any respect for the Tower of Eradication and even had a slightly hostile attitude, Cohen's expression became solemn, mixed with astonishment and shock. He remembered that when he was undergoing training at the tower, his teacher had told him a story while having a drink. It was a story of internal dispute, battle, and tragedy. Cohen had difficulty believing it and gritted his teeth as he said, You are from an external group of swordsmen of Eradication. You are someone from the Disaster Sword Group." The moment his voice faded away, the red and black swordsman acted. A reddish power of eradication surged from his body like a flood, forming ferocious waves flowing along his green sword that slashed down with an astonishing momentum. The sword was ruthless and fierce. Cohen felt himself falling into a crimson vortex. The power of eradication in his body was torn to pieces and he was unable to muster his power. The swordsman's ruthlessness followed the sword straight towards Cohen's chest. His fair face was now cold like frost and no longer calm. The red and black swordsman then said in a cold voice, "Disaster sword? Disaster? Are you comparing us to those monsters? Is this how you address Lord Crassus' sword?" Cohen gritted his teeth. The weapons of the two men swiftly clashed in the air. "That is fine." While fighting, the swordsman still had the energy to speak. "We are destined to be the nemesis for you outdated, conservative, and sissy academics. One day, we will destroy your tower of eradication and prove your absurdity." It was a cold, murderous tone. At the next moment, the green sword surged forward. Cohen's saber blocked the green sword, but at that instant, he felt the violent power of eradication battering him like a raging tidal wave. Cohen was shocked. His opponent's power of eradication was unhindered as it entered his body and corroded his strength like a strong acid. The police's glimmering star-blue saber was instantly thrown off. Cohen gritted his teeth in astonishment and retreated again. However, the green sword was like a shadow following closely with murderous intentions. No matter which direction he turned to, the sword would not be far behind. The young police officer tried to use his own power of eradication to cleanse away the intruder in his body. "This is the glory of the stars." Cohen sighed. "That which was supposed to showcase the power of eradication in battle is currently being applied to me." At the next moment, the police officer's silver-white sword flashed out once more. This time, it headed towards the swordsman's throat. However, his opponent was insane and reckless. He did not look at the approaching saber at all and drove the green sword that was like a red tide towards Cohen's heart. The crimson power of eradication in the sword broke out and tore Cohen's clothes at his chest. Cohen made a great effort to maintain his attack but hopelessly saw that as the saber and sword clashed, amid the strikes of the power of eradication, the sword and saber both went through. Shit. Is this the style of the disaster sword? Embracing a concept of such an insane sword style, unmatched power, disregarding all costs, and with no winners. Also, a never-before-seen violent and frightening power of eradication that could invade the body, no wonder they were expelled from the tower. Cohen forced a smile as he greeted his death. Two weapons, one green, one white. One had a red tide that was frenzied and difficult to block. The other glimmered like the light of a faint star. The outcome of the battle was set. Chapter 13, The Sound of Sabers and Knives, 2. Thales had never seen Jayla's knife attack a person with such wrath and momentum before. He could vaguely feel the suffocating force contained in the two wolf limb blades. Ralph gathered all his strength and used his two hidden blades to protect his stomach. He then retreated quickly. The female bartender charged forwards even more fiercely in the blink of an eye, her twin blades slashing down like a thunderbolt. The two moved in synchronicity as though they were dancing, but inelegantly. Images of Ralph's knives then appeared and instantly greeted both of Jayla's blades. Cling. Clang. The sounds of battle continued. The hidden blade stopped Jayla's twin blades countless times. Her twin blades also deflected Ralph's hidden blades countless times. Both of them moved extremely quickly. At the street side, the shop signboards and shop fronts flashed by. Then, both of them seemed to stop as they concentrated on analyzing the movements of the other party. Thales watched attentively and even forgot to breathe. However, the offensive and defensive movements were very obvious. Jayla was using her twin blades to attack the vital points while Ralph was only defending with his two hidden blades. One attacked and one defended, it was a fight of skill and speed. But in the next attack, the wolf limb blade in Jayla's left hand suddenly burst out with a thunderous sound, creating a sudden jolt and knocking away one of Ralph's hidden blades that was used in blocking. Jayla's unexpected trump card maneuver surprised Ralph greatly. He made one mistake and every step thereafter became another mistake. Failing to intercept this blade caused a delay in withdrawing his other knife, his vital stomach area became exposed to Jayla's left blade. Slash! The wolf limb blade cut into his clothes and his chest. At the moment of life and death, Ralph did not hesitate to use his psionic skill. The name Phantom Wind Follower was not an undeserved reputation. The man tucked his lips and the tattoo on his face emitted a white light. With a sudden burst, a violent whirlwind appeared between the two, causing both Jayla and himself to move towards different directions. Ralph stomped his foot and, with unexpected deftness, used the force of the fear scale to jump up into the air, leaving behind only bloodstained traces. The female bartender was forced to stop her pace. She withdrew her arms and adjusted herself to adapt to the sudden wind. The thunderous roar of her twin blades had also been cut off. From a distance, Thales could not feel the gust of wind, but this did not affect his judgment, both of them were simultaneously affected by the wind. Ralph was thrown back while Jayla was stopped. The wind did not stop. Instead, it continued to grow larger. Ralph was like a kite floating in midair. His shining tattoos became even more dazzling. The female bartender had no choice but to bend her knee to resist the increasing wind. At the same time, she took the opportunity to recover her body strength. Ralph was no longer smiling mischievously. The pain in his chest terrified him. This little girl is a big problem and her strength is probably no lesser than the 13 generals of the Brotherhood. Recalling the action of the twin blades, the Phantom Wind Follower decided that he cannot allow her any opportunity to use her twin blades and turn the tables. Fortunately for him, she had expended a lot of energy during that offensive. The Phantom Wind Follower's face turned cold. He took out the hidden blades with both hands. The wind rose. Under the cover of the wind, Ralph demonstrated once more his phantom-like form. The next moment, Ralph had appeared above Jayla's head. Jayla gritted her teeth and immediately swung her knife upwards. Clang! However, Ralph retreated after a single blow. His figure was like the wind and had disappeared far away. It gave Jayla no chance to counterattack, nor the opportunity to take the offensive. Cling! Ralph's hidden blades emerged once again, this time from at Jayla's lower left side. He attacked and missed, immediately retreating once more. As long as your sudden and continuous attacks are interrupted, the famous assassination style of the Charlton family would no longer work. Ralph's voice came again from the wind. Jayla struggled to defend against her opponent's guerrilla tactics. Because of the wind assaulting her, she also had to use a lot of energy to maintain her movements. At the same time, she must predict where Ralph was going to attack next. Thales watched nervously. What do I do? Ralph's gentle voice came from all directions again. Tell me. Why is the Charlton family hiding together with the Brotherhood? Maybe we can sit down and talk about it. Jayla's expression turned solemn. She unexpectedly closed her eyes and seemed to have made a decision. Jayla reversed her grip on the twin blades and fiercely inserted them into the earth at her feet. Ralph's hidden blades once again appeared over her head. But this time, Jayla spun around on the spot. The knives that were stuck to the ground suddenly turned, in tandem with her arms. Boom! There was a thunderous sound. The rocks from the ground were sent flying several meters up. The flying rocks obstructed Ralph's line of vision. The blades flashed faintly among the rocks. Ralph roared as he retreated. The tattoo on his face glowed even brighter. The wind in the sky suddenly sped up. It whirled with a terrifying force, scraping the earth and scattering it everywhere. In the fierce gale, the rocks flew everywhere. At that moment, an entranced Thales exposed half his head from his hiding place as he watched the battle. He suddenly heard a hoarse voice that was hard to identify. Lower your head. Thales instinctively lowered his head without any time to daydream. Whoosh! A rock from the battle flew over Thales' head, a few of them crashing into the side entrance of a store behind Thales. The wooden door that was hit caved in. Thales looked behind and patted his chest in cold sweat. If I had not lowered my head. Before he could react, a slim but valiant figure appeared beside his hiding place. Leave quickly. Thales was dumbfounded. In front of him, Jayla was not doing well. At that moment, the once valiant female bartender looked tired. She was gasping for breath and her left arm was trembling. He has found my weakness, and as I am unable to continuously attack him, I cannot defeat him. The female bartender placed her hand on Thales' shoulder and gave an embarrassed smile. If things keep going this way, you will be discovered eventually. I will lead him away. After that, you must leave alone. Go down the left alley. Cover your breath with the black cloth. If you hear any sound, turn around immediately and use a different route. The Brotherhood did not attack very far inside. As long as you cross the center of the Red Street Market, there should be fewer people. Brat, even though you're alone, you must survive. Thales stared dumbfoundedly at the female bartender who suddenly bid her farewell. That was until her figure darted back towards the center of the gale wind outside the streets. Thales subconsciously stretched out his hand to grab her back. Jayla. The boy listened to the sound of fighting that once again echoed in the distance. He then remembered a scene. It was at night behind the Sunset Pub's kitchen, and there was dog meat in front of him. Eat a little slower, brat. This dog is something I caught. So what if I'm a bartender? I am Jayla Cha, I am Jayla. I am a well-trained bartender. You can't take this dog thigh. You won't be able to bite it. Goodbye, Sister Jayla. Goodbye, JC. Thales resolutely turned around and proceeded towards the depths of the Red Street Market. I must live. I owe this to Jayla. The sound of battle behind him traveled further and further away. On a messy battlefield. Cohen leaned against his sword. Holding onto the wall with his left hand, he knelt down and coughed harshly. The police officer's chest was bleeding. His left chest had been skewered. His lungs were injured and his heart was almost affected. Besides that, his opponent's violent power of eradication was still fluctuating in his wounds. Even Cohen's prided power of eradication, glory of the stars, could not withstand it. But the enemy, Cohen raised his head to look at the stoic-looking, red and black swordsman. The man's left pauldron was pierced by Cohen's blind thrust. The shoulder was bleeding, there was a gash on both his left chin and his neck. However, his situation was far better compared to Cohen's. At the moment their swords were about to pierce one another, the two men displayed completely different fighting achievements. Cohen executed a part of the glory of stars and condensed that part of the power into a star shield to protect his heart. The shield deviated the attack that was aimed at his vitals, and then, Cohen thrust forward with all his might with the saber in hand. As for the red-black swordsman, he ignored the silvery white saber aimed at his throat. Instead, when the saber was about to hit, he became calmer and his attacks became faster. His sword quickly reached Cohen and pierced his chest. He then took advantage of the moment when Cohen's saber trembled to lower his head and avoid the attack to his throat, leaving behind only gashes on his neck and chin. He further endured Cohen's strike at his pauldron to push his sword in deeper. The relative superiority was evident. You are a great swordsman, the red-black swordsman said suddenly. Confronting such a move, most people would attempt to dodge before fighting back, but you were determined to pierce through it. The army must have taught you how to condense and form that shield, right? Cohen ferociously coughed up blood and laughed. A veteran of the army told me that on the battlefield, one must have a life-saving skill. That way, a person would live longer than his enemies and have fewer injuries than them. The red-black swordsman was silent for a while before chuckling. He has surely never been a Suicide Squad member. Cohen gasped and his brow wrinkled. At the Western battlefield, the Baron Bone and Orc Assault Team Suicide Squads, have you done that before? The red-black swordsman nodded. 3 times. Which squad? Cohen licked the blood in his mouth and lifted his head. The Skull Guards. 17th Suicide Squad. Fakin has Suicide Squad 3 times? Cohen gave a knowing smile. Looks like you have offended an important person. What about you, police officer? The red-black swordsman quietly asked. Crow Guards. 2nd Shock Brigade. Thunderbolt Crow of the 2nd Shock Brigade? The swordsman frowned. Poof. I had thought that Karabayan sounded familiar. Looks like it was a nobleman. Cohen spat blood out and laughed bitterly. In fact, I always wanted to ask, was the Chaka wine given before charging delicious? My father never allowed me to drink it. It is difficult to get to drink it. Damned quartermaster even wanted to embezzle money from the wine of dead people, the swordsman coldly replied. Really? Yeah. The conversation between the two suddenly stopped. The red-black swordsman's ruthlessness and rage had died away. Cohen's helplessness and gasps had also diminished. Groudon Raymer of the 17th Suicide Squad in the Skull Guards. Shield Saber Troops. The red-black swordsman, Groudon, said in a cold voice, that is my name. It is an honor to fight you, Your Excellency, police officer. Cohen Karabayan of the 2nd Shock Brigade in the Crow Guards. Combat Captain. Cohen gave a sad smile. The honor is mine. Your Excellency, gang hooligan? Cohen stopped smiling in the next second. They both looked at each other seriously. On Cohen's saber, the glory of the stars flickered. Violet energy surged through Groudon's right arm, such that the blood vessels seemed to stand out. The sword strike that determined life and death, that is the moment of the swordsman of eradication. It was an honor, sacred and cannot be blasphemed. But at the next moment, both their expressions changed. They suddenly heard the howling of a gale force wind from next door. A slim and heroic figure wielding twin blades fell from the air and landed on the street. This distance should be enough. The female bartender gasped for breath and saw the two figures, one standing and one kneeling. She then saw Cohen's apparel. I hope the brat can, eh? The kingdom's police? This is a war between the underworld gangs. Why is this cop here? Cohen and Groudon also stared at her in surprise. Another gang member? Cohen thought. I hope she is not from the Blood Bottle Gang. This woman. I did not hear about her from His Excellency. Groudon thought to himself. Is she a chess piece from outside? You cannot run anymore, bartender girl. The wind howled, accompanied by a hoarse, effeminate voice. Ralph appeared at a corner and also saw the two swordsmen. Groudon. Shouldn't you be guarding by His Excellency's side? Ralph looked at the swordsman and frowned. Why are you here with this, cop? Good. Cohen thought. They are partners. So? The police turned towards the bartender. Since this woman is my opponent's enemy, she shouldn't be part of the Blood Bottle Gang. Focus on cleaning up your rat. Groudon the red-black swordsman did not seem to want to talk to Ralph. I will take care of my task. After speaking, Groudon lifted his saber grimly at Cohen. The officer also stood up slowly. He gritted his teeth and held his silver saber horizontally at his chest. Ralph curled his lips. The wind kept rumbling by his side. Jayla took a deep breath and knelt down to adjust her angle. All 4 of them understood the situation. There were 2 from Blood Bottle Gang, 1 from the Brotherhood, and 1 a police officer. The next moment, all 4 of them moved. Groudon's saber flashed red and mercilessly pursued Cohen's heart. Cohen's face turned white as he confronted Groudon. Drawing his saber, he made a specialized defensive move. Ralph's figure disappeared again, but the wind charged towards Jayla. Jayla's body rose suddenly, her twin blades seemed to slash the air as she advanced, but she unexpectedly charged towards Cohen. Thales carefully covered his breath with the black cloth as he ran away. He had already bypassed the deathmatch between the 2 groups of elite thugs. Among the crowd was a 2 meters tall figure that stood out. He possessed a powerful, striking force that sent the Blood Bottle Gang members in red bandanas flying wherever he went. This person must be a master from the Brotherhood. He is either one of the 13 generals or one of the 6 powerhouses. Either way, he could not be one of the 3 legendary assassins. Thales just quietly bypassed them. This was not his war. He wanted to run away, not just for himself, but also for Jayla and the beggars of the 6th house. Thales turned a corner and crashed right into an invisible air barrier. At that time, he still did not know that this was a master's famous air wall. In a bad mood, he hit the barrier once. Damned mystic. Now I need to make another detour. I hope I don't meet anyone. Thales then remembered that a voice had told him to lower his head. At first, he had thought that the person was Jayla. After all, she had immediately appeared in front of him then. But later, he realized that this voice could not belong to Jayla. It was a hoarse voice that was difficult to differentiate. Jayla, Ralph, and himself were not the only ones there, there was a fourth person. Thales' scalp tightened. He suddenly thought, if the voice that suddenly appeared belonged to a fourth person, why did Jayla and Ralph not notice it? Jayla had obviously stood in front of me after that rock shot behind me. Thales had concluded without a doubt that this person's strength was more frightening than Jayla and Ralph's. If he is not hostile, why did he not come out and help? Bump! Thales ran into another invisible barrier. He patted his head in annoyance. There are more and more of these tricks. Don't you need money to run these? Thales turned towards another direction and ran. Bump! There was another barrier. This time, Thales did not manage to stop himself and fell to the ground. The left side of his forehead knocked on the corner of a house. Thales grimaced and rubbed his head. He lifted his bleeding head and looked ahead. Something is wrong. He was at the intersection. The surroundings were dark, but according to his memory, he should be near the center of the Red Street Market. Even the sounds of slaughter were getting further away. Thales then turned towards the other three directions. He moved his foot forward lightly and stretched out his hands. He then felt the barriers at two nearby areas. 3 roads were sealed? Thales was startled. It's starting to become dark and mysterious, like a horror movie. Thales was silent for a moment. He then turned towards the only direction that did not have any barriers. He silently extended his hand and, sure enough, walked on continuously, unhindered for more than 10 meters. It is like an exit that was deliberately left here. Thales' heart sank more and more. Unexpectedly, I ended up coming here. Sigh, fate is truly a bitch. Thales suddenly dropped his right hand that was covering his forehead, letting his blood drip continuously on the ground. The boy resolutely walked another dozen steps along the open street until he was near a building. At the center of the building was an ajar, large wooden door. Thales looked up at the huge sign on the door. The barely literate boy could just make out the words. It was something he learned when he went begging at the Black Gold Casino. That word was chess. Thales turned around and looked at the other 3 blocked roads. He then remembered the bleeding and pain in his head. Nowhere else to go. This invitation is really crude, Thales muttered. However, he sighed and stopped hesitating. He pushed open the half-open door and walked into the chess room in the center of the Red Street Market. It was pitch dark inside. There was only a bit of light in the distance from something that resembled an old-fashioned candle. They really know how to set the atmosphere. Welcome to my amusement park, my little friend. While walking past the chess tables and bumping into a lot of them, Thales heard a delighted and relaxed voice. My name is Asda Sekern. My colleagues are accustomed to calling me the Air Mystic. A very long time passed. Thales exhausted 2 lives worth of strength to calm himself down. There was only a single candle light flickering faintly in the darkness ahead. It was the entrance to the cellar of the chess room. Thales inhaled deeply and descended into the cellar. He then held his breath and suppressed his heart that was beating wildly. In front was a charming man with long, dark brown hair and blue clothes. The man was seated at a long table. He smiled and nodded at Thales. As for the issue of the invitation, I will pay more attention to it the next time. At the inner altar of Sunset Temple. A gray-haired and middle-aged noble could not suppress the excitement in his heart. In front of him, the flame from the small lamp carrying the future of the kingdom grew bigger and bigger. The red color of the flame became brighter and brighter. He lifted the lamp and strode out of the inner altar of the temple. Behind him, an elder priest was alarmed. He stretched out his hand, wanting to obstruct the way, but suddenly thought of something and stopped his hand. The priest breathed a sigh of relief. He watched the figure of the noble walk further away and slowly sat down. After a long while, the elderly priest called out to the trainenia. Prepare yourself. From tomorrow onwards, open up the inner altar. Chapter 14, Asda Sekern. Even in Asda Sekern's very long life, his first impression of the boy was very interesting and ridiculous. The black-haired boy seemed to be in a sorry situation under the dim candlelight. Blood dripped from his forehead, his young face was covered in patches of blue and purple, his neck was red with strangulation marks. The boy trembled slightly. He wore tattered clothes made from hemp and a dagger was rigidly tied to the legs. After hearing Asda's identity, the boy seemed to be at a loss. The boy's hand was on his chest and he was slightly nervous. He seemed to vaguely understand the meaning of the word mystic. The pressure in different parts of his body changed suddenly, such that even his breath was mistier. However, his eyes are out of the ordinary. Yes. His queer eyes are not filled with panic and vigilance. Instead, they seem to be filled with curiosity and excitement. What Thales thought in his mind at the time surprised even himself. After being surprised upon hearing that the man was a mystic, he suddenly felt the impulse to ask what was a mystic. Do I have an occupational disease? It was at this moment when Thales saw something at the corner of his eyes. At a dark corner were 3 odd spheres placed on the ground. Each sphere was as large as a person, but when Thales faintly made out the hands and feet on the sphere, he suddenly turned pale. I believe you have already met Talon and Moria of the Brotherhood. The mystic Asda noticed his gaze and answered with a grin, they were very ambitious. They went straight to the Red Street Market from the start. Apologies, I am not accustomed to the choking or crushing style like Morris, I prefer simpler methods. Molding a person into a spherical shape is simpler? Thales' heart sank as he silently criticized. "Come, child," Asda said with a laugh. His voice was pleasant, graceful, and courteous even. "Come here and look at my chessboard." Thales gulped a mouthful of saliva and turned around. Chasing the image of the human flesh spheres out of his head, he then quickly analyzed his situation. After that, Thales saw that Asda's left hand had a blue energy sphere that looked like it was a 3D projection. He knew it was not. He decisively eliminated the idea of putting a dagger through the man's neck. Thales calmly took 3 breaths, according to the method used in his past life for Viva examinations, before walking up slowly. If it is a blessing, it is not a curse. If it is a curse, it is unavoidable. Asda gave a ghost of a smile towards the boy, whose movements were like an adult, as he waited for the boy to get nearer to the chessboard. Just as he was about to open his mouth, he was surprised to see the boy pull out a chair and take a seat. He then frowned, seemingly dissatisfied with the view. He finally got down from the chair and pushed it closer towards Asda before climbing back up to sit. "Ugh, my legs are sore." Thales laughed awkwardly at Asda. He accidentally tore open the wound on his forehead and gave a harsh cry from the pain. "That is my oversight." Asda turned around with great interest and tapped his right hand lightly. Something seemingly pressed down on the wound on Thales' forehead and the blood stopped flowing out. Did you raise and regulate the air pressure?" Thales touched his forehead in surprise and found an invisible film isolating his hand from the wound. Asda stopped smiling and nodded quietly. "That's right. Did your teacher teach you physics?" "Air, no." Thales let go of his hands embarrassingly. It seemed Asda had regarded him as a noble or a boy from a rich family. Asda nodded and then turned to the chessboard on the table. "Can you recognize this?" Thales looked carefully at the map on the table. "A board game with the red street market as the map. No, this is the map of the current battle outside. The red pieces are the Blood Bottle Gang, the black pieces are the Brotherhood." Thales answered suddenly. "Of course." Asda expressionlessly stretched out his right hand. 2 black pieces and a crystal piece flew from afar and he caught them with his hand. This should have been a perfect trap. In a short while, I would have Morris and Senza die here. However, things always have a way of fouling up, don't they? The 3 chess pieces flew around Thales' head like birds. Just treat it like a magic trick. Thales forced himself to stay calm as he watched Asda's performance. Firstly, the men in my team are all useless. Obviously, they should have attacked Morris and Senza at the first instance and killed them at all costs. Instead, they timidly went around the enemy and used guerrilla tactics to whittle them down. It's a typical case of bullying the weak and avoiding the strong. Secondly, I am not sure if it was reinforcements from the Brotherhood, but in short, the entrance of an unexpected piece had disrupted my deployment. As Asda narrated emotionlessly, one of the pieces above Thales' head fell onto the board. "This is the one that followed you. Your comrade that came from the lower city district had frightening speed and defeated Dorno and Sven in one face-off. Ralph is still chasing behind her right now. Even Ramino, the psionic with tracking abilities, could not find a trace of him in the dust. I can only say that it is gratifying for the Brotherhood to have such a master among the younger generation." The black swordsman piece landed on the map, standing together with a red swordsman, one in the front and one at the back. Further away was a red prime minister. Thales knew he was talking about Jayla and felt uneasy. But he hoped from the bottom of his heart that she was safe, especially when there was still a red prime minister in the distance. The breach is fatal and there were a lot of pieces that escaped. All of them were just underlings, but... Asda sighed. Through them, the Blackstreet Brotherhood's headquarters found out about the situation here an hour earlier than I expected. I can feel that Lance and his subordinates have already taken control of the entrance. The rat trap is broken. He lowered his head, looking regretful and sorrowful. At that moment, Thales almost thought that the person in front of him was a compassionate temple priest. But Asda immediately raised his head. The sad expression on his face vanished without a trace. He gently waved his fingers and 2 other pieces that were suspended in the air began to spin around again. This one came from the other direction. It is not known which side he is on. He killed the Leighton siblings faster than it would take to slaughter 2 pigs. This guy cannot be stopped by anyone nearby. I could only send out Groudon, who had been by my side. Now, I do not have anyone here that I can speak to. Asda seemed dissatisfied and dropped the crystal knight from the air, placing it together with a red guard. This piece is probably from a different faction. If it does not belong to a noble, it would be from the government. This was also unforeseen. Thales swallowed his saliva again. The last one would be you. As nobody was available, I had to personally invite you. Asda turned his head, his eyes sharpened. The last, small, black piece fell from the sky and landed in the center of the map, beside a red king. Thales became extremely nervous. "Tell me. Where are you from?" Asda leaned back. His expression was difficult to discern. "Why did the people of the Brotherhood send you to the center of Red Street Market? Are you a frightening weapon sent here to assassinate me? Perhaps you have important information or a parcel to exchange with another chess piece? I hope you can give me a friendly reply voluntarily instead of shouting 'Go to hell, Mystic,' and then rushing forward. To be honest, that is just suicide." Asda quietly looked at him, his eyes sincere. His eyes were unlike Rick's, which were full of ulterior motives. The sincerity in Asda's eyes was emotionless, as though he did not care about the answer to his question. At that moment, Thales thought that the man in front of him was not human. Stay calm, Thales, stay calm. The boy reminded himself, trying to recall his Viva presentation in seminar speeches, how to introduce the audience to an unknown domain based on their current understanding. I'm supposed to be good at this, right? Thales took a deep breath. Mr. Asda Sekern, are you saying that by sitting here, you would be able to know what is going on in the entire Red Street market? Thales first needed to gather intelligence. Not exactly, Asda replied indifferently. I will know even the slightest change of the air in the whole street. From the change in air pressure in the body to the flow of air outside the body. In other words, anything that breathes in the Red Street market is being monitored by me. This is his ability. Is it a psionic skill? Is this why he was called the Air Mystic? Thales secretly thought to himself, no wonder the Brotherhood was so badly beaten. Then you should know. Thales began to comb through his own words and logic to look for a life-preserving opportunity in the exchange of words. Along the way, my companion and I cautiously tried to avoid confrontation. We only fought when there was no choice, regardless of whether they were from the Blood Bottle Gang or the Brotherhood. I believe this can prove that we are not from the Brotherhood. At the very least, we did not come here for the Brotherhood but had entered the battlefield inadvertently. We have no intention of opposing you. It makes sense. Asda nodded, still devoid of emotion. However, his tone did not soften. But you still took my pawns. I don't care about their lives, but I care that my plans and objectives are being interrupted. It does not matter whether it was intentional or not. Even the most corrupt judge would not turn a blind eye to manslaughter, would he? And you have not answered my question. Who are you and why are you so important? Hearing this, Thales quickly revised his message. I am an enemy of the Brotherhood. These words made Asda raise his head slightly. Thales had realized the raison d'etre and decided to reveal part of the truth. I am just an ordinary beggar who fled after offending a high-ranking person of the Brotherhood. Because the Brotherhood's eyes and ears are all over the lower city district, my only chance was the adjacent Red Street market belonging to the Blood Bottle Gang. However, my companion and I did not expect the gang war to take place tonight and so, inadvertently. I apologize for our recklessness. I can provide you compensation once I am able to. I believe my future value will definitely be worth your while in giving me a chance. I am already destined to become an enemy of the Brotherhood. Even if I am small and weak, the enemy of an enemy is a friend. I believe the Blood Bottle Gang does not need to help the Brotherhood eliminate a potential enemy, do they? Asda narrowed his eyes. Truly an eloquent child. That is all? That is all. Asda remained silent for a long time. There was an unexpected, indistinct smile on his face. There is no huge change of air pressure in the body. Although the breathing feels nervous, it was also smooth. Sigh. Although you did not say everything, you also did not lie. The mystic gave a wry smile and shook his head. He then sincerely said, so, your presence and the disruption of the chess game, it is all just a coincidence. In fact, I do not care about those pieces you took. After all, those are just small pieces. The so-called strongest 12, 13 generals, psionic warriors, 6 powerhouses. Apart from Sansa, these people are all merely ordinary class and supraclass. Even the Blood Bottle Gang is nothing but a relatively large chess piece. Even when you disrupted my plan and dismantled my trap, I didn't care too much about it. Asda wore a wry smile and looked at Thales. But unexpectedly, my plan was destroyed by accidents and coincidences. This frustrates me. Accidents. Ha ha. I am starting to understand Empress Helen's source of strength. What a strange and abnormal person. Thales' nervousness lessened as he observed the air mystic. The world is truly marvelous. Asda suddenly burst into laughter. Child. Did you know that mystics are born from accidents? Thales' heart began to beat faster. He felt an inexplicable danger from the mystic who had a strange expression. A long time ago, there was only magic and no mystic energy. Asda showed a complicated, yearnful expression. Wizards pursued the truths of the world. They used all kinds of ingenious methods and wisdom to take advantage of the natural resources and energies in the world, to create an even more beautiful world. That was until one day, a low-ranked wizard apprentice accidentally discovered that his magic was not stable. It was as though the magic had a life of its own and rebelled against its master. The next moment, Thales' whole body quivered. He felt a huge and strong force surge from below into his body. The boy was shocked to find himself floating up. The flustered boy reached for the table edge in panic, but he found himself floating higher and higher. His arm could no longer reach the table. He quickly looked towards Asda and realized in horror that the mystic had an expression filled with agony and mania. Yes. Everything began like this. A wizard apprentice accidentally lost control. Asda nervously said to himself as he gently picked up the black piece that had just fallen on the map. Thales watched the pawn get taken away and his heart sank. He already knew what the mystic wanted to do. From instability to complete loss of control, and thence until domination. The world you are familiar with begins to collapse, fear, and panic strike. Nobody can save you except yourself. Thales painfully discovered that the flow of air around his body started to accelerate, the atmospheric pressure began to change. Nobody knew what he discovered. But when he came back to the world, people found out that he was no longer a wizard, he was no longer human, he was no longer an ordinary man. As the atmospheric pressure and the temperature rose, the terrified Thales felt the air become stuffy and he began to sweat profusely. It was just a one-time loss of control. He unintentionally killed the two gods. It was just like how one trampled on two ants accidentally. Asda's words were extremely grim. He slowly turned and his lips curved upwards. This crazy man. Thales stopped clenching his teeth and wanted to speak but found that his voice would not pass his throat. That was the first mystic. He was also the most powerful mystic throughout history. The wizards were horrified to find that their incantations, spells, and research were like a child's trickery. The gods were bewildered to find that even those with supernatural powers and divinity collapsed on the first blow. How ridiculous. The colorful era of the naive and ignorant wizards has ended. The nascent mystic, with a foothold beyond space, surpassed all the gods and prevailed over all living things. In the heat, Thales began to feel himself getting crushed from all directions. He felt his limbs pressed into his body. His body slowly shrunk into a ball as he floated in the air. It was truly horrifying. It was like being squeezed into a washing machine in his previous life. Fear. Humans definitely have fear. Unfettered power that only a small number of people can enjoy. How could they not fear it? In the air, Thales felt his whole body begin to lose his strength. He also could not help but notice that Asda had placed himself outside of mankind. And so, the war began. Asda gently stood up, the energy sphere in his left hand continued to spin, perhaps it was because of chance. That we lost. I could only hide in this lawless place, running the stupid blood bottle gang, waiting for that remote and slim hope. Each step and each breath must be taken with the utmost care. Asda lowered his head in desolation. Without looking, he raised his right hand at Thales who still hung in midair. He then grasped firmly. Boom! The joints in Thales' body began to make loud, popping noises. His eardrums felt like they were being crushed. The blood in his body surged. Is this what it means to kill someone while chatting with him? Thales thought hopelessly. His brain was no longer clear. Is it like pinching an ant to death? The forehead wound that had been healed by Asda gushed once more with red blood. Is this a mystic? It feels no different from psionic abilities. As Thales neared death's door, he caught Asda's left hand in the corner of his eye. A blue ball of light constantly whirled between the man's fingers. It was as though it was churning an infinite storm. Thales' chest, scalded by the silver coin, suddenly started to burn with pain. The muscles all over his body were burning up. It was getting hotter, burning more and more. So, the mystics who still possessed mystic energy had to stay in hiding, to struggle like rats in the sewers. Asda could not help but frown as he said the last sentence. His last words should have been accompanied by the death of the subject. Did my control decline? The mystic did not think much about it. He was indifferent as he tightened his grip again. However, at that moment, in the midst of the burning illusion, Thales felt a little happy. The pain from being crushed by the atmospheric pressure seemed to have decreased. He found himself able to speak again. With effort, he opened his mouth and looked at the energy sphere in Asda's hand. I hate people who hold a ball and pretend to be all bad SS. Damn you, mystic energy. Thales heard himself say, and then heat radiated from his body. Asda looked surprised. The dark chess room was suddenly basked in a red light from an unknown source. Asda looked around in shock and immediately found the source of the red light. He looked down at his left hand and saw a trace of radiant red light appear inside his blue energy sphere. A dot. A line. A section. The red light spread out slowly until it corroded the entire energy sphere. No. This is. Asda muttered as though he had just seen an inconceivably beautiful scenery. The translucent blue energy sphere in Asda's hand suddenly stopped spinning. The energy sphere then turned red and then disappeared from his left hand. The air mystic suddenly raised his head to look at Thales who was in the air. In Thales' right hand was a red energy sphere that floated quietly. Asda's eyes then looked excited. You are, boom. Before the mystic could finish speaking to Thales, the world seemed to shatter. The energy sphere suddenly exploded. An invisible energy flashed from inside and transformed into a tremendous and magnificent power. If the cellar of the chess room was like a balloon, then the balloon had just been blasted into pieces. Doors and windows, glass, chessboards, candles and everything, blown away and smashed up. The beams and pillars of the house suddenly exploded. Boom! Asda was hit by a huge force that was like a heavy hammer. He flew back and crashed into the wall. Thales was also knocked back by the force, causing him to crash heavily into the ceiling. But the ceiling and the walls also exploded. The shackle that seemed to curb his strength had vanished, along with his consciousness. On the streets. Boom! Morris had just dropped 2 blood bottle gang men who were suffocated by his psionic power. He was surprised to hear the explosion. The extent of this explosion, it is at least a battle of supreme class. Is it Sansa? Did Sansa meet the air mystic? No. Then Sansa must be dead. Morris thought bitterly. The elites around Morris were also surprised. Boss. The assassin Leorc was covered in blood. He quickly rushed over from afar. His expression showed mixed feelings. He was out of breath as he spoke. The air wall has disappeared. Chapter 15, Yodel Kato at your service. Groudon and Jayla shot towards Cohen at top speed. If Cohen was a point, then he would be the point that would form a right angle based on the direction where Jayla and Groudon were charging towards him, Groudon from the north and Jayla from the east. Groudon growled, his blood vessels bulging as he thrust his red sword towards Cohen, not resting until his sword draws the blood of his enemy. At the start, Cohen was stunned for a moment. However, Jayla lightly pointed at his left shoulder and then pointed at his right shoulder. Cohen was already preparing to draw his sword to strike Groudon, but he saw the look behind her goggles. The police officer immediately understood Jayla's intentions. Looking at his heavy injuries, he did not think too much. He knew that he would not be able to stop Groudon's sword and so, he would stop defending altogether. Cohen then thought to himself, "Girl, don't let me down." Cohen's expression was clear as he ignored the sword approaching him. He gave up his defensive style, passed the saber over to his left hand and resolutely held it in a reverse grip. He concentrated as he waited for the woman's arrival. Sure enough, in the next moment, Jayla threw the wolf limb blade from her right hand at the aggressive Groudon. The flying wolf limb blade shot straight towards the red-black swordsman's abdomen from the left. With her right hand free, she rushed towards Cohen without slowing down. In the next moment, Groudon's sword tip reached Cohen's chest area and the green longsword pierced into Cohen's abdomen. However, Jayla's flying wolf limb blade streaked across the air and slashed the left side of Groudon's chest. Groudon roared. Cohen groaned in pain. Thanks to the interference from the wolf limb blade, Groudon's thrust shifted a little to the side and missed the man's vitals. The glory of the stars in his body surged up swiftly in Cohen's body and accumulated around the flesh near the injury. Looking at the fierce eyes of the red-black swordsman, he then turned to look at the woman to his right while tenaciously enduring the pain. He decided to believe in her. But what about her? Would she believe in me? Groudon snorted coldly and pulled out his sword. He then headed towards the approaching Jayla. In front of him, the police officer endured the pain in his chest and abdomen. The glory of the stars glimmered, and the saber in his left hand fell with a loud crash, stabbing into the ground below. It looked like the final struggles of a heavily injured swordsman. Groudon seemed indifferent. An entirely different power of eradication compared to Cohen's glory of the stars surged through his body. He readied his stance. With one move, he would be able to strike the young girl between her eyebrows. You cannot save him. As a result of your reckless actions, both of you will die together. However, Jayla simply glanced at Groudon and she moved past Cohen, even bypassing Groudon to get behind Cohen. Groudon was stunned for a moment. She did not want to save him? Jayla did not choose to take advantage of this moment to attack Groudon by surprise. She knew that Groudon was already prepared to counterattack. Behind her, Ralph rapidly approached together with the wind. The woman knew that there was only one chance. She then calmly extended her right hand. Her survival would be in Cohen's hands. The police officer gritted his teeth. Suddenly, he swung his right hand that was infused with the glory of the stars fiercely behind him. Now! He then saw Jayla, who had just passed by his right side, grab his right hand in midair, like passing a baton in a relay race. A.H. Cohen roared. The remaining glory of the stars all over his body converged into blue glowing spots and gathered in his right arm. With that arm, he yanked Jayla back. The police officer's left hand held on to the saber stuck in the ground. It served as a pivot point. An unpleasant sound of friction could be heard from the tremendous momentum. At the next moment, following the police using the saber as his support and pulling her back, the graceful Jayla became like a flail. She swung in a semicircle in midair and due to Cohen's swing, landed on Groudon's other side. She had changed positions in an instant. Jayla held Cohen's hand as she would to her lover. Her wolf limb blade in her left hand was held high above, with the blade pointed downwards, and the cold blade slashed downwards. Shock appeared on Groudon's face. Her goal is, I see. She wanted to obtain the cops' cooperation, and while coordinating their strength together, they can instantly attack the side where I am undefended. He pursed his lips indifferently. A great plan, but in the end, she's still just at ordinary class. She underestimated the skills of a supra-class swordsman too greatly. The power of eradication in his arm was swiftly activated. The green longsword began to move faster than usual as it swung to the right. Before you can strike, my sword will Groudon's expression froze momentarily. He saw Cohen grit his teeth and rush over before he used his body to block Groudon's saber. Sparks shot up. Crack. Slash. Groudon's shoulder bone was sliced off, and his abdomen was cut open. The wolf limb blade slashed Groudon's right shoulder and tore through the right side of his chest. Cohen's right arm was dislocated and his right rib was lacerated. A large amount of blood from Groudon's shoulder gushed skywards and sprayed over Jayla's face. At this moment, Ralph's wind reached Cohen's side. Groudon opened his mouth and spat out blood in disbelief. Then, he laughed as though he had freed himself and collapsed. What a great attack. What great teamwork. Groudon gently closed his eyes. Within a short moment, the terrifying red-black swordsman was slain by the unfamiliar, yet tacit, cooperation between Jayla and Cohen. The Phantom Wind follower saw Groudon's fate. He could not believe that the Air Mystic's terrifying superclass swordsman had the upper hand at one moment, and yet was so easily slain in the next. However, he did not have time to be shocked, because Cohen roared and stomped with his feet, then he pulled the saber out from the ground with his left hand. Cohen turned to charge at Ralph regardless of his dislocated right hand. The light from the saber flashed. Ralph laughed softly. How could you intercept the Phantom Wind follower with this speed? Even while moving at high speeds, I can change directions at any mo what? Ralph was surprised to see that Jayla, who was beside Cohen, had knelt down on one knee and then crashed into Cohen's bosom. The police officer managed to turn around with a painful groan. However, he now shot towards Ralph at more than twice the speed from before. Damn! With this speed, it's impossible for me to. Ralph roared and deployed his psionic power with all his strength. As the winds whistled, Ralph fished out his hidden blades from his sleeves to forcefully block the police officer's fatal strike. However, Cohen's saber seemed as though it had a life of its own. It twisted and stabbed, suppressing Ralph relentlessly. Their blades locked. One of the signature styles of the swordsman of eradication was to lock an enemy's bladed weapon. Ralph then gave up all hope as he saw Jayla, who was still with Cohen, pop her head out of his bosom with a grim look. No. While he was struggling to break away from Cohen's saber, the female bartender stretched out her right hand and crushed his throat with ease. 2 people and 1 corpse fell on the ground at the same time. The police officer thought to himself, fortunately, this psionic had never been on a battlefield before. If he had pushed ahead instead of trying to fall back in the beginning, we would have died. Cohen spat blood out in a pathetic manner. His abdomen hurt and his right arm was dislocated. As a result, he was unable to get up. You, who are you? The police officer weakly asked the girl in his arms. Jayla had exhausted all of her energy and just laid there on his broad chest. She then turned her head and wiped off the blood on her face onto his uniform. The female bartender trembled slightly but still wore a relieved smile. None of your business. The young woman laughed as she replied, but her eyes looked distressed. Brat. You should be able to escape. Boom. At that moment, a muffled explosion was heard in the distance. Chiron, one needs enthusiasm when conducting research. One must not be lazy. Learning is a lifetime of interest and diligence. When you reach my age, you could find yourself alienated. You would become unsociable, indifferent, and you would have difficulty finding enthusiasm. You will learn that the things supporting you, in the end, are not vanity, achievements, or contentment, but the speck of pure obsession you had in the beginning. So, you must understand Professor Chen's stubbornness and madness. That's probably the only obsession he has left in his life. Thales shook his head. He kept another recalled piece of memory back into his head, and then pulled himself out of the rubble. As the boy climbed out of the rubble, covered in blood, he looked up and saw Asda gazing down at him with a complicated expression. The air mystic's clothes and long hair were still pretty and pristine. It was as though he had never experienced the explosion. Insane and paranoid, Thales criticized silently. He was extremely exhausted and unable to continue resisting, so he simply turned to lie down in the rubble. He was a little tired of the lawless world where power was respected. You, mystic, do whatever you like. Thales gasped and breathed heavily. A lunatic who kills people for a wrong word, no wonder the mystics lost the war. Asda silently watched Thales with a strange expression. After a while, he emitted a peculiar laugh. Ha ha ha, is this also a coincidence? The strange mystic gently waved his right hand and lifted Thales up into the air, but did not attempt to kill him again. He waved again and the atmospheric pressure began to change, instantly staunching all the boy's bleeding wounds. Thales was helped up by the mystic, his 2 feet touched the ground. However, the boy still looked at the mystic with enmity. He no longer harbored any hope of holding any sort of rational conversation with Asda. Child, you had just used some kind of power to break my mystic barrier, the thing you called an air wall, Asda softly said with an excited tone. Only Supreme Class Masters can do this, but you are only, moreover, the power in your body could interfere and affect my mystic energy. Do you know what this means? I don't even understand what you meant by Supreme Class. Thales replied weakly, even if I knew, I wouldn't want to tell a madman who just tried to kill me. Asda stopped smiling and gave him a deep look. Child, looks like you do not know your own nature. But never mind. Everyone will experience a first in losing control over themselves, and we all start from ignorance. Who would want to, eh? Thales calmed down for a moment and thought about the meaning of Asda's words. He immediately looked up in surprise at the mystic who had just tried to kill him. Experience a first in losing control over themselves? We? Asda gazed at the child with the eyes of a fanatic. Yes. We, mystics. Thales began to feel fear, for some unknown reason. Looking at the mystic's fervent expression, he subconsciously took a step back and shook his head in terror. However, the mystic firmly stepped forward and spoke with a terrifying fervent and insane tone, yes, child. What you said earlier is true. Your value in the future is worth my while to spare your, no, it is worthwhile for me to do my utmost to guide you. Child, what is your name? Ever since we were betrayed by those 2 bitches and lost the battle of eradication, our numbers have become fewer. You will become the leading member that will help us turn this situation around. They will not even realize it. Asda held his shoulders tightly as though afraid Thales would run away the moment he let go. I don't even know what you are. Thales murmured and took a step back, but Asda held onto him tightly. Asda's smiling expression was rather morbid. He was like a person who had not smiled for many years and had forgotten how to smile. He suddenly spread his lips wide, enough to reach his cheeks. Today is the day your fate turns. Asda said ecstatically, follow me. For some reason, Thales remembered the 3 human spheres in the cellar. He also recalled the man trying to kill him in the basement. Seeing Asda's morbid smile, other than panic, he had a strange feeling. God. Thales remembered Asda's strength and could not help but gulp. Mystic, but this is a lunatic who kills without batting an eye. Should I go with him? Thales opened his mouth with much difficulty. But he had finally broken away from the Brotherhood, from being a beggar after so much hardship. But in the next moment, as though Errol heard his voice, he no longer needed to decide. You can say no, but you cannot refuse. This is only the first time you lose control. Every ugh. Asda, who was still chattering away non-stop, suddenly had his expression freeze. A smooth blade of a sword suddenly stabbed through Asda's chest. Asda lowered his head incredulously, looked at the blade sticking out of his chest, and let go of Thales. Thales was also shocked. He took a few steps back, tripped on a plank of wood, and then fell to the ground. However, Thales did not see any fear, alarm, or bewildered emotions in the mystic's eyes. It was as though the man had not been stabbed but bitten by a mosquito, and with an astounded expression, had asked, "Why are there mosquitoes?" He looked as though he did not even feel the pain. It obviously pierced his heart, Thales thought in horror. Asda stared at the blade strangely. Impossible. Asda frowned. He looked up and thought carefully before he spoke to the person behind him. Even if you are a supreme class elite, it is impossible not to breathe, it is impossible not to move the air as you move, it is impossible for there to be no pressure in your body. As long as there is breathing, airflow, or pressure change, it is impossible to escape my detection. How long have you been in Red Street Market? How did you hide from my mystic powers? No, you could not break through the air wall either. Otherwise, you would have made your move in this room sooner, correct? Tell me. There was no reply. Asda looked belligerent as he turned around, ignoring the blade stuck in his back. He then coldly said to his attacker, "Tell me." This time, Thales saw the person who attacked Asda. The attacker stood quietly. He was dressed in black clothing with a hood over his head, his gloves and boots were also in black. Stranger still was that the attacker wore a dark purple mask. The mask had two dark lenses in the position of the eyes. The man was motionless, like a ghost. At that moment, anger passed through Asda's thought, which was formed with mystic powers. After all, anger was a human emotion that had left him a long time ago. So the mystic power in his body surged. It quickly made him calm and rational again. I believe you must be very patient, Asda softly said. You waited for my mystic power to become unstable. You perceived the drop in power and ambushed me? Wonderful. You did it, you managed to ambush a mystic. Asda ignored the blade in his chest and stared unwaveringly at the attacker wearing the strange mask. So, who are you? Did you accidentally discover me when you noticed the disturbance at Red Street Market? With this sort of skill, which family are you from? A barrage of questions, but the masked man still remained silent. Asda frowned. He had asked a lot of questions, but could not feel the air pressure in the strange man's body change. Could it be that he is neither surprised nor glad, and has no reaction at all to these questions? After hundreds of tests, my mystic air perception and mind reading is no longer effective? I can only use brute force. Did you think this would kill me? Asda approached one step closer. He gently raised his left hand, his eyes expressionless. The air began to flow as his fingers moved, squeezing around the strange, masked man. This cannot spread beyond Red Street Market, Asda thought to himself. If the Kingdom's Wrath or the Black Sword noticed this and rushed over, today's actions would be meaningless. Using a bit of mystic power is enough, I just need to deal with this masked man. This time, the masked man spoke. No, a mystic cannot be killed. His faint voice came through the mask. So you were neither dumb nor deaf. Asda gazed at the two lenses on the mask. However, he saw nothing except complicated machinery and gears behind the lenses. Doubts rose in his heart. You don't seem to be completely ignorant about us either. Thales almost exclaimed aloud. This was because the masked man's voice was the same hoarse voice that had been difficult to distinguish. It was the same voice that told him to lower his head during the fight between Jayla and Ralph. With this in mind, Thales' trembling hands slowly began to calm down. The masked man lightly stepped forward and went past Asda. It was as though the frightening air pressure could not even hinder him. While the air mystic was caught off guard, the masked man stretched his hand out and pulled. The dagger disappeared from Asda's back and appeared in his hand. It was a short sword with a gleaming blade and a dark-hued cross on the crossguard. Asda became somber. It was unusual for him to be unable to respond. He glared at the uninvited guest coldly and took the current situation into account. What is he relying on? According to the intelligence updated yesterday, Judgment Spear is on the western front line, the motionless bow is at the outskirts, and the constellation staff is at the Rejuvenation Palace. All that was left is the mysterious Supreme Sword and Shield. Supposedly, some say it is being kept away but others say it is at the Broken Dragon Fortress. The other anti-mystic equipment in Eternal Star City was also not enough to seal a Supreme Class Mystic. So why is this masked man still so calm? Thales could barely believe what he saw. When the masked man had taken out the dagger from Asda's back, the wound that should have been bleeding emitted a small blue light. The light turned into his clothes, appearing like new. It was as though he had never been stabbed in the chest. A mystic. Thales started to believe in Asda's insane words. What kind of monster is a mystic? Before Thales had time to clearly think about this, he was shrouded by a figure. The strange, masked man walked in front of Thales. Before the boy could react, he had already enclosed him in an embrace. Thales struggled, but the masked man lightly held the back of his neck. The boy felt his strength slowly disappear and became limp in his arms. In a daze, Thales saw Asda lift both his hands up in the corner of his eyes. "Hey, be careful of his." The boy wanted to speak, but the masked man had covered his mouth. Asda stood behind them, no longer intending to continue observing. "This boy is too important. Since you know mystics cannot be killed, why did you act?" Asda's mystic energy started to move. He gathered the air within 50 meters around him. "You cannot be a true class, but you should at the very least be at the peak of supreme class. You even have a way of hiding from mystics." With a nasty expression, Asda waved both his hands. Thales then felt the surrounding air pressure change. The air mystic was about to attack. But no matter who you are, Asda's words were then interrupted by the terror in his eyes. "This? What is this?" Following this interruption was also a change in the surrounding air pressure. Thales looked across the shoulder of the masked man and saw that Asda looked frightened. The mystic trembled and took a few steps back. A purple light shone from where he had been stabbed. This was the first time Thales saw alarm in the mystic's eyes. The masked man lowered his head towards Thales and his hoarse voice echoed, "A mystic cannot be killed, but they are not invincible." For some reason, Thales suddenly felt calm. He felt much safer with the strange person compared to the lunatic behind. The alarmed Asda looked terrified as he covered his chest. It was as though the purple light was about to explode from there. "No. No." He then looked back up at the masked man. Fear and hatred were evident on his face. "This is, the Sovereign State's, legendary, anti-mystic equipment." The masked man reached out and covered Thales' eyes. "This weapon, I have never seen this before, no, those two bitches." Thales could not hear the rest of Asda's flustered words because as Asda gritted his teeth resentfully, he turned into hundreds of light rays, and then exploded into a burst of unlimited energy. Thales felt as though he had entered another space where all the light and sound had disappeared from his senses. He knew he was already far away from Red Street Market, and that the night was over. When Jayla awoke, she found herself being carried on solid shoulders. Both sides of the street slowly retreated. She became aware of her situation and impatiently hit the back of this familiar man. "Hey, Edmund. Let me down. I still need to go back." The fat cook snorted impatiently. "Let you go back to that pretty boy? The cop? What if Big Sis knew, hee. Jayla's face turned red. "That cop is not my lover. I clearly saw you lying in his arms. That look of happiness. Did you not pay attention to our surroundings?" "I did. It was dark and windy, late at night, amidst the flowers in the moonlight, a rendezvous between." "Your main point is wrong, fatty. Whether I am wrong or not, we will know in the future. Sigh. I don't want to talk nonsense with you, I still need to look for someone. Everything is like this now. Don't expect me to let you go back. Damn fatty. Lousy cook. Let me down. I want to challenge you to a battle. Fight with you? You are only amazing as an ordinary class. Come back to me once you reach supra class. Ha, I really have someone important to find. Don't tell me it's a cop. Even if you want to look for a prince, it is useless. Damn fatty. Still harping on this issue? Sheesh. Can you just let me down? Pretty please? Uncle Edmund. You're already 20 and still acting spoiled? Do you think you are still a little girl? Don't you feel shame? Why would I? Uncle, you are already 40 but don't you also act like you're 3 years old? Humph, mentally, I am still a young man, eh? Something is not right with that sentence. At the same time, on the other side of the street in the distance, Cohen was awakened by a slap in the face. While dazed, he realized that the person in front of him was his immediate superior, the police chief, Lord Becdara. But this time, the chief looked concerned as he treated Cohen's serious injuries. When Lorbeck noticed that Cohen had regained consciousness, he said angrily, "Has the hero woken up? Did you manage to eliminate the Brotherhood and the Blood Bottle Gang after your stroll?" "Aye. How dare you? You openly disobeyed orders and acted on your own. Are you proud of yourself? But what? If it was not because I wanted to save your father's reputation, I would have already shot you. Or do you think we came to look for you when we saw the sword beams? Boo. But what? I really have the world's worst luck to have a subordinate like you. Do you think you are the protagonist of the Dark Knight Temple's drama? Then that girl just now must be the female lead? She. Do not mention that girl. If your father knew you came to the Red Street Market in the middle of the night to look for women. No. How can you still speak without shame? Even the hot favorite of the Leia Club, Miss Lillian, reported that you visited her in her bedroom in the middle of the night. That. Security Captain, Class 2 police officer, openly violated orders to seek pleasure at night. You better be prepared for a suspension when you return. Ha! At this moment, another loud noise carried from the center of the Red Street Market. Boom! The whole city heard the terrible explosion. This time, the explosion sent shockwaves reverberating into the sky. Hot dust from the explosion suddenly flew in from afar. Chief Lorbeck and the dejected Cohen were astonished as they stared at the center of Red Street Market. This is bad. The chief muttered, the funds that had just been approved for construction. Chief, what is with that evaluation? Those who don't manage money or family, just shut up. On the other side of the street, the cook Edmund and Jayla, who was on his shoulders, were both shocked by the aftermath of the explosion. Little Jayla, Edmund muttered, luckily we ran quickly and are far away. Is that the point? Didn't Big Sister say safety first? You are really my 3-year-old uncle. Hey, how can you speak like that? When Thales' feet touched the ground again, he fell onto the floor and coughed. All his wounds began to feel painful at that moment. The strange, masked man stood still by the side as though nothing had happened. Asda, is the mystic dead? No, the weapon is not perfect and cannot seal him permanently, the hoarse voice replied. However, he should not reappear for at least a dozen years. Thales' heart tightened at first, and then calmed down. The mystic was crazy and extremely abnormal. The impression he had was too profound. 10 years is enough to come up with countermeasures. Thales suddenly looked up and remembered something. I still have a companion. She protected me. She is all right, the hoarse-voiced person seemed to understand his thoughts and immediately replied. Right now, she is on her way back to the lower city district. Thales breathed a sigh of relief and then collapsed. However, he immediately remembered an extremely important detail. You, sir. Thales asked with the greatest care after remembering his previous contact with the mystic, who are you? Thales did not have high expectations of a secretive, masked man to give him a friendly reply. However, the next scene almost caused his jaw to drop to the ground. The masked man still had a murderous look the previous moment, but he suddenly took a step back and placed his right hand on the left side of his chest, while his left hand was placed behind his waist as he knelt down on one knee. The man then respectfully and sullenly replied, My name is Yodel Kato. I am at your service. Chapter 16, The Dawn, Blood and Lights. When a second, larger explosion sounded from the center of Red Street Market, Morris, Leyork, and the others had escaped from the Blood Bottle gang members, who could not coordinate due to a chaotic command. From a distance, they saw Sunza, who was circling around with Kirks the clown. Sunza was almost 2 meters in height, but he did not look skinny and was strong and sturdy. His dark skin tone, yellowing straight hair, and frosty countenance made him look slightly somber, but all the elders in the Brotherhood knew that, apart from the 3 main assassins, the crownless fist Sunza Myron, who was also the head of the 6 powerhouses, was the most dependable person in the Brotherhood. No, most of the time, he was even more dependable than the 3 main assassins. You call this a psionic ability? Sunza said disdainfully as he coldly watched Flying Blade Clown Kirks jump around the roofs, continuously shooting flying blades from his bottomless dimensional pocket. Morris, Adrianessa and Leyork, 1 superclass, 2 other great fighters in the ordinary class, and an unknown amount of other people. One of Blood Bottle Gang's 8 psionic warriors, the Flying Blade Clown Kirks, fought as he crouched on a roof and watched with a grave expression on his face as more powerful fighters from the Brotherhood gathered together. The Blood Bottle Gang elites who were his subordinates had been completely massacred. There was also Sunza, who was almost up to Supreme Class. Blood Bottle Gang's reinforcements were nowhere to be seen. There was no news at all from the 2 superclass fighters, Song and Roubaix, and neither was there any news from Ralph. He had lost contact with Solo for the past 10 minutes, and that coward, Tinker, was probably hiding in the dark and observing the situation. Rumino should have been the one responsible for Sunza, but since Sunza was completely fine, Rumino was probably already at Hell's River, waiting to be transported to the other side by the ferryman. Even worse, after the air wall disappeared with the explosion, the Air Mystics orders had been absent for a long time. Kirk's contemplation did not last too long. Behind Sunza, one of the Brotherhood's 13 generals, the Northlander, Steel Pricker Adrianessa, clenched his teeth. He nonchalantly threw a human head that Sunza had just obtained onto the floor. That head belonged to a supreme-class psionic warrior and puppet master from main Equinox Dynasty 1 in the Eastern Peninsula, the Divine Chaos Soldier, Song. The clown contemplated for a while and took out 2 throwing knives from his dimensional pocket. He then placed an oxygen tube in his mouth in order to defend against Morris' psionic abilities. At the same time, he also made a decision to leave the place immediately. Under these circumstances, even the Air Mystic cannot blame him for his decision. But the next moment, Kirks was shocked to see Sunza's fist speeding towards his face. Since when was Sunza's speed so fast? However, he immediately saw a plump figure behind Sunza. It was Morris, who was tightly clenching his teeth and activating his psionic ability. He did not remove all the air around me. The clown fought in shock and despair. But, removed all the air around Sunza? When the air wall disappeared after the first explosion, Morris knew that there would be unexpected changes in the situation on that night. And when the second shocking explosion sounded from far away, Morris managed to react. It was time to strike back. Without making a single sound, he firmly removed all the air on the path between Sunza and Kirks. Sunza felt the change in his surroundings. This boxer, who had worked together with Morris for years, immediately held his breath and threw a punch. Without the burden of air resistance, and with a speed that was a few times faster than usual, he hurled his punch forward. The battle did not continue for long. Sunza easily caught both of Kirk's throwing knives. He then used his continuous, relentless, accurate, and fearsome iron fist to break apart the psionic space that Kirks depended on. The clown depended on this psionic space to fend off long-distance attacks. He also came well prepared with oxygen supplies and throwing knives, causing Morris to be unable to do anything about him for some time. At that moment, his psionic space shattered. Leyork was already standing quietly behind Sunza. Morris, who had just finished using his psionic ability, bent and panted while holding his knees. His fat cheeks wobbled. He did not look at the clown again, whose death was certain, but turned to Senza and said, the second explosion came from deep within Red Street Market. An accident unknown to us must have happened. But no matter what, as the air wall has stopped working, something must have happened to the air mystic. Besides, we have retreated far enough, and our people have almost fully assembled. Morris recovered his breath and sized up the situation with his experience. Both Song and Kirks were defeated here. If this is a bait from them, the scrumptiousness of this bait is enough for us to give this battle our all. Leork ignored Kirk's pleading and coolly sliced open the latter's neck, which was covered in grease paint. He then nodded and said, after the road was cleared, the front line reported that they have discovered Phantom Wind follower Ralph's dead body. At the back line, Sir Lance sent news regarding Laspin and Dorno's deaths. Once we add in Kirk's death to the mix, the enemy's battle power in Eternal Star City has been reduced by half. In response to this, Sansa put down his smoldering fist. His response was short. Then let's fight back. And so, the dawn in Red Street Market was welcomed with the color of blood. When Mayor Rick, who was the logistics director Lance assigned, saw Morris and Senza return, drenched in blood at the intersection between XC District and Red Street Market, the sky was almost bright. Morris tapped his shoulder and exhaled. He spoke, smiling, although there were some ups and downs during the process, Red Street Market is ours now. Of course, just as expected, Rick answered with a smile. In his heart, he was thinking about ways to repay the child beggars who had escaped from the abandoned houses and about Quiet's death. At least that ghost won't be coming anymore. Rick thought and gazed across the crowds to look at the mysterious cloaked figure. And, with Sir Lance's promise, I won't be demoted too badly. The silent assassin Leork did not even look at Rick. He walked past Rick and, paying no heed to his blood-covered face, enveloped Felicia, who was walking towards him from behind Rick, in an embrace. Wow, you are still alive? Without looking the slightest bit worried, Felicia chuckled. Apart from you, who else is able to kill me? Leork grinned ferociously and kissed the woman hard on her lips. Has anyone seen Edmund? Sanza's voice rang from the crowds. Without him, it wouldn't have been so easy for me to defeat the Divine Chaos Soldier. That damn cook. Seeing that no one answered, he cursed fiercely. He runs away whenever it's time to drink. On the 16th of November in the year 672 of the calendar of eradication in Errol, a bloody and cruel overnight battle erupted between the two tyrants in the underground world of Constellation, the Western Peninsula's second-largest kingdom. It was a disproportionate battle. In the beginning, Blackstreet Brotherhood stepped into Blood Bottle Gang's ambush and trap. However, the result of the bloody battle left many in shock. Indeed, Blackstreet Brotherhood suffered 214 casualties along with 367 injured. Among the 13 generals, 9 participated in the battle and 7 of them died. The other 2, Morris and Sansa, who were part of the powerhouses, battled until the end and survived. In contrast, Blood Bottle Gang, the nobility among gangs, had suffered the biggest defeat in their history. They suffered 445 casualties and 290 injured. Among the strongest 12, 10 of them participated in the battle, and 8 of them died. All 5 of the 8 psionic warriors who participated in the battle had died. There were even rumors that Air Mystic, who appeared openly for the first time in more than 10 years, had gone missing. That night, the explosion in the center of Red Street Market almost woke every single resident of the capital, Eternal Star City. Among the innocent civilians in Red Street Market, 1,229 were affected by the explosion. Among them, 275 died in the explosion, 438 were injured, and 516 of them lost their homes. Red Street Market, especially its central area, was severely damaged. The incident was even mentioned by the capital city's chief garrison during the following day's Imperial Conference. Its position in the agenda was only behind the discussion of tax exemption for the opening up of border counties and the reception of the extet diplomats. In the end, the Imperial Conference instructed the Western City Police Station to take quick action towards subsiding conflicts and preventing private battles among the people. Ever since then, Red Street Market changed hands. The Brotherhood's forces penetrated through the entire Western District. The balance of power in Constellation's underground world began tilting completely towards Blackstreet Brotherhood. However, what many people did not know was, on that night, another huge incident, which would alter the future fate of Constellation, happened at the same time. Being carried in Yodel's arms in an embarrassing position, masked weirdo, masked weirdo, masked weirdo. Thales kept consecutively repeating this in his heart 3 times at once as he was transported across districts completely unknown to him at extreme speed. Thales felt he could not keep quiet anymore. Can you say it again, the reason you were looking for me? The transmigrator asked in pain as he stared at the breaking dawn in the distant sky. To reunite you with your father, Yodel said respectfully. He lowered his body and placed his finger on the surface of a river, causing a ripple as they passed through a bridge's archway. Thales rolled his eyes. And who are you? Your father's secret protector, Yodel said respectfully as they passed a tall watchtower. Although a full-sized adult just shot past with a child, the guard in the watchtower did not even blink his eyes. Thales heaved a sigh. Did you get it wrong? I'm only an escaping child beggar. Absolutely not. This is the will of God. Yodel said respectfully and stepped on a gold store's signage. The signboard, hung up with iron chains, did not even shake. Thales was about to go mad. Who on earth is my father? An important person whom I deeply respect, Yodel said respectfully and shot past a white eagle that was hunting a swallow. His speed shocked both birds. Thales lost all hope. What is he trying to do with this rhetoric answer which does not reveal any important information but makes others go wow, he's so polite, it will be embarrassing to press him further. Thales gave up. When they realized that they got it wrong, Thales thought quietly, they won't kill me to prevent me from divulging their secrets, right? The transmigrator tilted his head and waited for the sun to rise. He asked, spiritless, Yodel? Yes? Don't tell me that you originally used to engage in diplomacy. No. What a waste. With the way you speak, it's really quite suitable for you. Thank you for your acknowledgement. It was as though Yodel could not sense Thales' sarcasm and continued speaking respectfully. He flipped over a tall wall and, like a spider, quietly landed on an avenue with intricate flower beds on both sides. Then, Yodel stopped, out of Thales' expectations. In front of their eyes was a plain but stately carriage. In front of the carriage, a middle-aged man with grayish-white hair holding a lamp walked slowly towards them. Yodel put Thales down softly. As the transmigrator landed on the floor, he suddenly turned and looked at Yodel. He looked slightly, unhappy? The middle-aged man approached. With the help of the light from the man's lamp, Thales could not help but realize that he was wearing clothes that were plain but stately. The middle-aged man had a wide lower jaw which made him look kind. The short mustache above his lips was neatly kept. Although he was showing respectfulness, his two tall cheekbones made him look a little stern. Yet, the bridge of his nose looked a little soft, which gave him a very gentle air as well. This is probably a really complicated person, Thales thought quietly. The man raised his black, gloved right hand, and tipped his cylindrical hat, bowing slightly. Good morning. Compared to Yodel's hoarse and sullen voice, his was steady and reassuring. This person is a noble, a high-ranked noble. Thales concluded. Could he be? But the words from Yodel from behind him made him retract the thought. The masked man spoke in a calm, but impertinent tone, why are you here? The middle-aged noble nodded softly, smiled, and answered without taking the other's tone to heart, to ensure that nothing goes wrong. He does not trust me? Even Thales could hear the dissatisfaction in Yodel's voice. He trusts you very much, to the point that he is willing to entrust you with the life of his kin. The middle-aged noble slowly said, but I do not trust you, and you know why. Thales felt as though there was a surge of electricity running between Yodel and the middle-aged noble. Yodel kept quiet for a moment and, unexpectedly, did not speak any further. The middle-aged noble did not look at Yodel anymore, but slowly crouched down and flashed an appropriate smile. Child, he said to Thales, I know that your life had been difficult thus far. The middle-aged noble looked at the scars and wounds on Thales' body. He took the glove off his right hand and extended the hand to caress Thales' wounds. Every time his hand touched a wound, his brows knitted slightly. I am very sorry. But child, please trust that after one more procedure, your misfortune will come to an end. Thales, who was a little unfamiliar with this, was about to say something when the middle-aged noble put down the lamp in his hand and held the transmigrator's right hand, then he took out an intricate sheathed dagger from his bosom. Thales instinctively wanted to inch backward, but his right hand was caught tightly by the middle-aged noble. What are you trying to do? Thales asked anxiously. The middle-aged noble looked at him with a resolute look, and without letting go with his hand, drew out the dagger slowly. Snap! It was Yodel. He bent down, extended his hands and pressed hard on the middle-aged noble's shoulder. Through the mask, Thales could not see Yodel's face clearly. But somehow, he was very grateful towards his father's secret protector. There was no other reason. He had seen too much blood and too many blades tonight. Yodel! The middle-aged noble looked as though he was very displeased. He raised his head and knitted his brows while speaking in a low voice that allowed no grounds for refusing. You know that this is a necessity. Thales raised his head and looked at Yodel. He felt quite anxious, although he knew vaguely that the middle-aged noble did not intend to harm him. Then use his own dagger. Yodel said coldly. The middle-aged noble stared at Yodel. At that moment, his gaze looked as though it was filled with ice. After a long time, the middle-aged noble compromised. He nodded and returned the dagger to his bosom. Having seen this, Yodel let go of the middle-aged noble's shoulders. Do not be anxious, child. The middle-aged noble turned his gaze back to Thales. His tone was gentle again. I am only getting a small blood sample. Thales looked at him. The middle-aged noble's gaze was very gentle but determined. The transmigrator nodded his head, awaiting his fate. The middle-aged noble extended his hand and took JC's dagger, which was wrapped in a piece of cloth and had no sheath, from Thales' leg. He warmed it up on the lamp for a while. Then, without causing Thales much pain, the middle-aged noble used JC's dagger to prick the middle finger of his right hand and removed a drop of blood. What is he trying to do? With this world's level of technology, can they even run DNA tests? What if the test reveals my true identity? Under Thales' curious and apprehensive gaze, the middle-aged noble gently dropped the drop of blood on the floor. The next moment, Thales felt the surge of a familiar burning sensation. It poured in from his chest, his blood vessels, his muscles, and then his entire body. Ah! He could not help but shout. But the middle-aged noble's gaze was not on him. Thales turned his head and followed the middle-aged noble's excited gaze. He was looking at the lamp he put down beside him. Boom! The previously still lamp was now burning rapidly and violently. The flame became bigger and bigger, and the flame's heart turned from orangey yellow to bright blood red. The flame tilted towards his direction. Thales suddenly understood something, the fresh blood which dropped onto the floor. The flame's heart, which was reddening and increasing in size. A surge of fear suddenly appeared in Thales' heart. He turned his head to look at Yodel as if he was pleading for help. He saw that the masked man was putting his hand into his bosom to procure a glass bottle from his chest. There was a small flame inside. It was a Kindle. At this moment, the flame's heart within the glass bottle was bright red like blood, and it was skewed slightly to the side. Thales turned and looked at the lamp on the floor, then at the tinder in Yodel's hand, then at the blood on the floor. His face paled. It took a long time for the flame in the lamp to return to normal. Impossible, he muttered. It was only when I reached Red Street Market that I was sure that you are the one, Yodel said hoarsely. The middle-aged noble seemed to be very excited. He carefully put away JC's dagger, which was in his hand, and spoke respectfully. Now. However, the transmigrator cut him off with his actions. Thales clenched his teeth and aggressively held his right hand's middle finger with his left hand. He squeezed the tiny wound hard, and a few more drops of blood fell onto the floor. Puff! The flame of the lamp, which was on the floor, became bigger and bright red again. This was a divine art placed by head ritual master Licia 12 years ago. The moment your blood drops onto the floor of the capital city, the bloodline lamp will light up from dormancy, the middle-aged noble spoke, trembling. Thales suddenly understood. On the day he was beaten up by Quide, his blood fell onto the floor. On the day Quide massacred the child beggars, his blood fell onto the floor. When he hit the air wall, his blood fell onto the floor. When Asta tried to kill him using mystic energy, his blood, again, fell onto the floor. Thales helplessly heaved a sigh. He suddenly felt like laughing out loud. Chapter 17, End of Arc, Kingdom's Bloodline. An accident. Thales lowered his head. A deep, helpless feeling rose in his heart. Disaster strikes unexpectedly. During that instant, the air mystic smile, Thales had never been able to tell whether it was real or fake, appeared in Thales' head as he spoke to him. Look, this is what it means to be a coincidence. Yodel quietly put away the kindling. The middle-aged noble calmed his excitement, then gently patted Thales' head as he looked at him. It will be all right, child, I am Gilbert Queso. You can trust me, just like how your father trusts me. Come, child, I will take you home, to see your father. Thales took a full minute to recover from his daze. It did not matter whether it was Yodel or Gilbert. Both of them waited patiently while he was in his absent-minded state. Let's go. When Thales lifted his head, his gaze had already calmed. Gilbert nodded his head with praise in his eyes. He stood and gestured in the direction of the carriage. Thales turned his head and looked at Yodel. Yodel, you'll come with me as well, right? Of course. Yodel's hoarse voice rang in the air, yet it was incredibly soothing when it fell onto Thales' ears. Please head on first, I'll be right beside you. Thales sucked in a deep breath and took large strides to the carriage. Mr. Gilbert. Yes, young sir, what is it? What did you do previously? I was working in the Foreign Affairs Department, my young Sir Thales. Foreign Affairs Department? Thales turned his head a little and rolled his eyes at Yodel, at an angle Gilbert could not see. Thales turned his head back forwards. For some unknown reason, he had a vague feeling that Yodel had smiled behind his mask. Thales moved to stand before the carriage. The carriage was simple but obviously expensive. The glass on the black coach was adorned with crystal drops. The two large horses that were pure black in color were quietly chewing at their bridles. One of them affectionately leaned towards Gilbert. As he looked at the high footboard, Thales began comparing his 7-year-old body to it and felt a little glum. Before he turned his head, Gilbert, who was beside him, pulled open the carriage door and carried him inside, placing him on the dark red carriage sofa. I deeply apologize, we do not have a boarding stool. Gilbert smiled apologetically and closed the carriage door. But I guarantee that this would be the last time. Thales sat alone on the wide sofa. He did not know what material it was made of, and although it was very comfortable, he felt a little restless. The coach's 4 corners were illuminated with luminous paint, allowing him to somewhat see the decorations in the coach. At the back of the coach was a picture of a star framed in a circular picture frame, and it was set firmly there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9. The star has 9 points. Thales quietly thought to himself, this is a 9-pointed star. Before he recovered from his absent-minded state, the carriage had moved. Thales crawled to the carriage window. It was daybreak, and the scenery outside the carriage window could not be seen clearly yet. So, Thales sat back down on the sofa in boredom. Yodel, are you there? He probingly asked. A reply immediately voiced beside his ears. Yes. Thales was taken aback. He sat up and looked around. However, apart from Gilbert who was driving the carriage, there was no one else both in and outside the coach. Never mind, I'm used to it anyway. Thales sat back down on the sofa and continued asking, where are we now? Mindy's Hall is straight ahead. The hoarse voice sounded again. Mindy? Whatever, I wouldn't know it anyway. Who would have thought that a few hours ago, I was still in the abandoned house, bleeding for the sake of survival, and getting injured for the sake of escape in Red Street Market? And now? Thales tapped the sofa beneath him, wondering who his father in this life was. Who cares? I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I've even run into that bizarre, immortal existence known as a mystic, what else can possibly scare me? The transmigrator exhaled. He suddenly felt a little warm and tore down the tattered clothes on his chest. He accidentally tore at the wound on his chest. Thales hissed and looked at the burn wound on his chest. On the edge of the wound quite burned, he could vaguely see a circle of flourished ancient words printed in an inverted manner. This is, a king does not gain respect by virtue of his bloodline. Thales recalled the words on that silver coin. He tapped his forehead suddenly. Mindy's silver coin? Isn't that Constellation's great king of the generation? Wait, Mindy's hall? The carriage stopped suddenly. Gilbert respectfully invited him to exit the carriage when Thales was still at a loss for what to do due to his head being in a muddled mess. Outside the carriage, there was an intricate little garden. It was paved with solid bricks made of a material Thales did not recognize. In the middle of the garden, there was an intricate fountain, and water was gushing out of a stone dragon's mouth, which had its mouth open to roar at the sky. Thales turned his head in a daze and looked towards the big, black, iron doors in the garden. The black iron doors seemed to be embossed with reliefs. Thales did not recognize any of the depictions on it. However, two large flags were erected on either side of the iron door and fluttered along to the wind. The flags were blue with white outlines at the edges. There were two silver cross-shaped stars overlapping with each other on both flags. One of the stars was larger than the other, and the smaller star was located at the bottom right of the larger star. Thales recognized the flag. On the western city gate, the flag that fluttered at the highest height had that pattern on it. Blue with a white outline, two silver cross-shaped stars, Constellation's flag. The two flags in the garden had an additional tiny 9-pointed star that had silver alternating with gold sewn to the bottom left corner of the big silver cross-shaped star. There were 4 golden points and 5 silver points in the star. That was the same pattern engraved on the back of the carriage. Thales snapped out of his daze. Before him stood a magnificent 3-story building. 8 intricately carved pillars supported the large balcony on the first floor. Light shone from one of the windows in the middle of the second floor. The house's main door was made of cedar wood. Thales once saw a furniture merchant selling a large cedar wood square table for the price of 50 gold coins at the Grand Bazaar beside the western city gate. Of course, in the end, he voluntarily sold the square table at the discounted price of 1 gold coin to Blackstreet Brotherhood. Thales followed Gilbert while his head was still in a mess. Yodel had offered to carry him when he spread his arms wide open, but Thales declined. He persevered and endured the pain from the wounds all over his body along with his fatigue while walking through the large cedar wood door with great difficulty. The entrance and the hall, including the corridor leading to a spiral stairway, were illuminated by large, gorgeous everlasting lampstands that burned with eternal oil. Fully armed guards stood in the corridor while keeping watch with utmost concentration. It was as though every single guard was meticulously chosen because their heights were uniform. They were all fully equipped with swords, shields, and bows, and all their metal shields had the gold and silver-colored 9-pointed star on them. Thales held the rails beside the stairs and slowly walked up to the first floor. On the first floor, 3 painted portraits hung on the wall facing the house's main entrance. In the middle was a young knight who had a valiant and powerful posture. He held a long spear and was in a charging position. His face was handsome, and his expression was heroic. The silver crown on his head had 7 stars on it. Against the backdrop of the horrifying battlefield, he charged forward fearlessly. The left portrait was of a warrior with a powerful physique wielding a sword and shield. The shield had a silver 9-pointed star. The crown on his head had 9 stars on it. His face was determined and extraordinarily valiant. The background was a lush, green tree that towered into the sky. The right portrait was of a kind and benevolent middle-aged man. He was sitting in the portrait. Behind him was a brightly lit city. His left hand held a valuable scepter that was mounted with bright blue crystals. In his right hand was a thick book, and there were 5 different pictures showing things such as the sun, stars, and the moon. The 3 nobles had different temperaments, but it looked like the artist managed to capture their individual charm. Thales looked at the portraits in a daze. It was as though they were there in person. It seemed like they were truly a great noble family with an extensive legacy. Unfortunately, Thales did not recognize any of them. Wait, why is that handsome middle-aged man so familiar? Thales was about to lift his clothes to take a look at the head portrait burned into his chest when the sound of steady footsteps appeared. This is Tormund I, the last prince of the final empire and the founder of Constellation. Known as the King of Renaissance, his bravery in the Battle of Eradication is still being eulogized even now. The one on the left is my dear IV, the battle companion of Chara the hero, and Kaplan the prophet, the protector of the sacred tree. Known as the Oathkeeper. He married the Elf Queen, and from then onwards, the Jade Star royal family possessed elf blood. Last but not least is Mindy's III. Known as the Wise King, every single person, from nobles to priests, and even from merchants to beggars, praised him for his wise governance. The voice was steady and authoritative. It traveled forward in a low tone, but it sounded like thunder hidden within clouds. That voice shook in the air faintly. Gilbert and Yodel, who were behind Thales, kneeled down on a single knee in unison. Thales gulped and raised his head gently. A robust figure walked slowly towards him. His mighty and resolute face reminded the transmigrator of the sword and shield warrior on the left portrait on the wall. He was a muscular noble with black hair, a tall nose, deep-set eyes, a broad face, and was in the prime of his life. The gaze in his sky-blue irises was as piercing as swords. The noble held a scepter in his left hand. He stood before Thales and scrutinized him. A little dumbfounded, Thales stared back at the noble in front of him. He began feeling uncontrollably anxious. Even if he had lived twice, no one had ever taught him how to act during these moments. The robust noble scrutinized him for a long time, so long that Thales started feeling embarrassed. However, to Thales, his gaze did not feel cordial or calming at all. In contrast, it made him feel heavily pressured and slightly out of breath. To put it unpleasantly, even as de Kern's crazed gaze felt better than this. However, the transmigrator suddenly noticed that the robust noble in front of him wore a crown that looked similar to the crown with 9 stars worn by the sword and shield-wielding warrior. Whereas, no matter how Thales looked at it, the scepter in his left hand was the exact replica of the blue crystal-studded scepter held by the middle-aged man in the right-hand portrait. Beside him, Gilbert reminded in a low voice, "Child, this is your father." "Father," he could not help but mutter. Thales lowered his eyes and looked at the astral blue cloak worn on the man's back. His father's face from his past life slowly appeared in his mind, but it was a little blurry. Thales sucked in a deep breath and refocused his gaze. "Who are you?" He heard his own voice ringing in the air in a flat tone. The robust noble did not speak, he only frowned. At that moment, Gilbert lifted his head. With a voice that allowed no room for doubt, filled with authority and respect, he spoke with a solemn tone. "This is Kessel Mindy's 80 Jadestar, King Kessel V in the family. He is the legitimate descendant of the royal family in the final empire, and he is the successor of King Tormund. He is the suzerain of the Western Peninsula's Redalians and Northlanders, the conqueror of the Dragon Skeleton Throne and the Aloof God's Altar. He is the guardian of the Sacred Tree and Serra Dukedom, the guardian of Steel City and the Alliance of Freedom. He is the Iron Hand, the 39th Supreme King of Constellation, the Southern Islands, and the Western Deserts." Thales felt as a chill rise within his heart, and his breathing quickened. A suffocating pressure that seemed to possess corporeal form pressed down on him. Kessel looked at Thales with a profound gaze. After some time, he turned his head and looked at Gilbert and Yodel, who were beside Thales. The robust King Kessel V spoke clearly and slowly with his deep and sonorous voice. "So he is my descendant, the kingdom's bloodline? The last and only remaining kin of our bloodline in all of Constellation?" Chapter 18, Father and King. Art 2, Heir of the Kingdom Dawn had arrived. In Mindy's Hall, the most important and most awkward reunion between father and son in the entire kingdom was unfolding. Thales blankly stared at the robust noble before him who was his father. He turned towards Gilbert and Yodel, a little terrified and helpless. However, both of them were quiet and had their heads lowered. He then looked at the guards around the gallery hall, but the superiorly equipped soldiers had their gazes hidden behind their face-concealing helmets and stood motionless. Then Kessel V's thick and sonorous voice rang beside his ears. "He looks like a skinny mud monkey." Indeed, Thales was not looking his best. His short, jet-black hair was cut unevenly, Sinti's handiwork, and covered in dust. His tiny face was full of muddy prints and handprints. Although Asda the Mystic had used a mysterious method to stop his various large and small wounds from bleeding, the abrasions, cuts, and bruises left by the incidents in the abandoned house and Red Street Market still riddled his body. On his dust-covered body, the child beggar costume made of sackcloth was also tattered and had a huge tear at his chest, almost revealing the burn there. Before entering Mindy's hall, he was even shivering in the cold wind. "I believe that you two would not get it wrong." Kessel's voice rang in the gallery hall. Thales raised his head again and looked at Kessel. His king, his father. But Kessel had already turned his head away and was not looking at him anymore. A slight sense of discomfort surged in Thales' heart, but he immediately suppressed the uncomfortable feeling. Kessel's thick and sonorous voice continued resounding, "Both of you know how important this matter is. Right now, the only people who know about this are the three of us. Of course, I will transfer Jin's here, as he requires qualified care. That is why the people in the know would be the four of us. When Morat returns, I will personally talk to him about this. From now onwards, Mindy's Hall shall be completely sealed off. To the world outside, spread the word that a royal treasure has gone missing and that I am extremely furious. We cannot take the risk of dispatching the royal guards as this would be too obvious. We must not let the enemy know of our next step. In the following month, his safety will be overseen by Jadestar family's private soldiers, consisting of 50 swordsmen of eradication. The level of defense might be considerably weaker due to the numbers, but these soldiers excel when it comes to loyalty and privacy. They can keep this secret. As long as they do not attract too much attention, it should be more than enough. Yodel, just to be on the safe side, stay guard here as well. Ida and the royal guards will be responsible for my safety this month." Yodel did not say anything. He nodded his masked head slightly. "Gilbert." Kessel still did not spare Thales even a single glance. He caressed the crystal on his scepter and spoke as he was immersed in his thoughts, his tone was full of authority. "Have you thought a reason for visiting Mindy's Hall at dawn?" "Of course, your majesty. The excuse is a ready-made one. There was a fiery battle between the gangs at the border of the lower city districts and the western districts. There were countless fatalities and a number of wounded. I hurried overnight to the imperial palace you were temporarily dwelling in to report this matter," Gilbert answered respectfully. "This is not enough. I will be returning to the Renaissance Palace tomorrow. However, for the following month, you will need to visit this place frequently. A better reason is needed." King Kessel shook his head. "What if I say that the circumstances surrounding the disappearance of the royal treasure are too mysterious and that you ordered me to thoroughly investigate this matter? It is a little rough around the edges. But for 1 month's time, it is adequate." King Kessel contemplated for a while and nodded. And then the King of Constellation finally placed his gaze on Thales, who was at a loss. His gaze was so sharp that Thales unknowingly took a step back. It did not feel at all like a father was looking at his son. The king looked like he did not care about Thales at all. 1 month's time, Gilbert, 1 month. Before his status is officially recognized, you are his personal tutor and will be responsible for all matters concerning his education. Yes, your majesty, as you wish, I shall do my best, Gilbert answered respectfully. Thales' heart sank. Kessel assuredly tapped his scepter on the floor and contemplated for a moment. You have to get him ready. He cannot appear in front of the entire kingdom, the 6 great clans, and diplomatic envoys from other countries like this. From etiquette to disposition, and from knowledge to appearance, he needs to look presentable. What we need is a proper heir to the kingdom, not an abject street beggar. Street beggar? Having heard this, Thales clenched his fist slightly. We will set Extet diplomat group's welcome banquet as the goal. I hope that he will be able to make an appearance by then. This will not be easy, but I believe that you are able to carry it out well. Thales' heart quivered slightly, but he silently listened to King Kessel's orders that left no room for doubt as the king planned his future step by step. However, there seemed to be no space for Thales' own will in his future. Why was it like this? He had just escaped from that miserable place that he had once gritted his teeth and persevered through when he lived there. He still had many questions and uncertainties in his heart. But this King Kessel that was standing in front of him did not seem to care about his thoughts at all. He only announced his order sentence by sentence and spoke about his own wishes. No one has to know about his past, but there has to be a story. Gilbert, invent a story regarding his origin. As long as his bloodline can be confirmed, I will discuss with Lycia regarding this. It is not impossible to deal with the gods, we need not fear gossip. Pick some of his peers out from the roster of nobles, along with educators and attendants for the heir. After he is recognized, all this will become the focus. Make sure to put all of these in the records in advance. I want to see the list of names before next week. And just to be safe, Gilbert, you have to reconfirm the clauses for royal succession in the Holy Constellation Constitution, along with precedents for cases like him and the Jade Star family. If there is anything that might be cause for dispute, it would not be too late for us to remedy it now. Thales furrowed his brows and continued listening as they plotted his future and his life. He was like a marionette. As for his marriage contract, I have an idea. We will discuss it later, Extet. At that moment, Gilbert spoke and cut the king off with a respectful expression. Your Majesty, there is still some time left as of right now. The middle-aged noble seemed to sense that something was amiss, but he tried his best to express his opinions. If you need to spend time alone with this child, we can. However, Kessel swiftly waved his hand and stopped Gilbert mid-sentence. At that moment, Thales saw that the eyelashes on the king's deep-set eyes fluttered. He felt as if a surge of strange emotions was emerging on Kessel's expression. Thales wanted to say something, but before the words reached the edge of his mouth, he swallowed it back. What should I say? What can I say? What should a 7-year-old child who was meeting his father for the first time say? Hey, father whom I just met, can I say something? Perhaps you should listen to my opinions instead of talking to yourself? Ah, it's too strange. Kessel looked like he intended to turn his head towards Thales, but then he turned back abruptly. He rested both his hands on his scepter and gazed at the 3 portraits, not speaking for a long time. Only at this moment did he seem to resemble a human being. Kessel turned around after a long while. He did not look at anyone. However, the authoritative voice that belonged only to Constellation's king, Kessel V, rang once more. In short, the duty bestowed upon the 2 of you is a very heavy one. Constellation has been heirless for 12 years. Only last week, whether by intention or not, Koster mentioned in his letter about the succession system in Extet. Both of you know how the 6 great clans would react. His appearance is a variable, but also an unexpected bargaining chip and advantage for us. It is time to alter our plans, to make sure that we are one step ahead of our enemies. Ensure that his presence is utilized to the utmost. Thales was stunned. Was this his father? Variable. Bargaining chip. Advantage. Utilized to the utmost? Are these what a father should say in front of a son he has never met? Thales heaved a sigh in his heart and lowered his head. So this is what it is, this feeling of not belonging. This doesn't feel like a reunion between father and son at all. He's more like a chess player who is naturally and nonchalantly moving a chess piece. Thales was obviously not the only one who felt this strangeness. Gilbert's countenance changed slightly, as though he wanted to say something. But in the end, he only lowered his head and heaved a small sigh at an angle the king could not see. But there was still someone who cut the king off without regard for the atmosphere. Your Majesty. Thales turned his head around in surprise. It was the silent Yodel who had spoken. The secret protector's expression behind the mask could not be seen, but his hoarse voice was extremely firm. He is first and foremost your kin, your son. And only then is he your heir. You cannot just ignore that he is your son. Thales raised his head and saw that Kessel V heaved a long sigh before he closed his eyes. Yes, he is my son. With eyes still shut, the king held his scepter tightly and spoke drearily. That is why I am here today. I entrust him to both of you. Remember, 1 month. Yodel's gaze behind the mask's lenses froze for a moment. In the end, he lowered his head and did not speak anymore. A slight feeling of uncertainty and shock crept into Thales' heart. The king nodded. He looked at Gilbert and Yodel, who both knelt on one knee. He then took one look at the dazed Thales with an indiscernible and complicated gaze, then walked away without hesitation. Gilbert and Yodel slowly stood up. The robust figure slowly walked down the stairs. The footsteps were heavy but authoritative. A king's authority. What? It ended, just like this? Thales was stunned and watched in disbelief as his father left. This isn't right. This so-called father, he sired this body, didn't he? But why? Why does he seem so emotionless? Also, the matters related to my future, have they been decided just like that? I didn't even have a chance to speak. Wait a moment. Thales finally could not resist and shouted out loud. He was done being a powerless chess piece. The robust figure paused for a moment and turned. Gilbert looked at Thales in shock. Yodel's expression was still hidden behind the mask. Watching the slowly turning king and enduring his sharp gaze, Thales suddenly felt as if there was a frog in his throat. But with great effort, he still opened his mouth and spoke. Although we have never met. Stumbling on his words, he extended his hands and swung it helplessly in front of his body while weighing his words. But since you are since we are. The king held the stair railing and looked at Thales with an indescribably complicated gaze. Thales shut his eyes tightly and opened it again, exhaling. I think. He pronounced the words with difficulty, his usual eloquence nowhere to be found. Damn, what sort of attitude and words should I use when facing this person, who is my father and the king at the same time? Adoration? Indifference? Stupefaction? Surprise? None of them seem right. Gilbert, who was beside him, extended his hand towards Thales as though he wanted to say something. But, in the end, he chose to remain silent. Thales' breath quickened. He furrowed his brow and said, I am actually a little perplexed. Perhaps, you can give me some answers. After all, we are related by blood. And you talked about so many things such as the heir, the kingdom, and the marriage contract, but I don't know anything. This might not be important for you, and you don't really care. Kessel V held on to his scepter tightly, not giving a single reply. His brows furrowed slowly. Thales bit his lip. He felt the burn on his chest start to hurt again. Damn it. Even my worst thesis report is less awkward than this. He swung his hands around lightly as he constructed his sentences. But this is my future. If you have already made your decision, you should at least help me understand the situation a little. Besides, you said that no one needs to know about my past, but at least I want to. What I mean is, at the very least, I need to know about my own past. I really want to know what actually happened. And also, the path I will be walking on. Kessel's gaze when he looked at Thales changed. It was no longer a scrutinizing, judgmental and critical gaze. It was as though, for the first time, he recognized that Thales was a human being, and also his son. Thales heaved a sigh. Whatever. He opened his eyes and looked straight at his father. Yes, I want to know everything about myself. I want to know my origins. Like, who my mother is, where I was born, and how I became the way I am now. Along with my identity, my future, and the choices I have, answers like these, instead of being an outsider, a chess piece, an object, that is if I really am your. Thales gritted his teeth as he said that word, son. Although your actions are really unlike a normal father, even though you are the king. Thales felt a little dizzy. The energy he expended tonight was too much for his 7-year-old body to bear. The king finally looked him in the eye. His sky-blue irises shone brightly inside his deep-set eyes. At that moment, Kessel V's gaze was quite complicated and indecipherable. Thales could not interpret anything further from it. Child, what is your name? The highest ruler in Constellation asked with his dignified voice. Thales stared at Kessel. Thales. He heard himself say, my name is Thales. Only now does he think of asking for his son's name? My God. Thales mentally shook his head. Thales, listen properly. Kessel narrowed his eyes, his tone cold. You do not need to know about many things, you need not concern yourself with them either. Your path has already been decided, you just need to follow it. What? At that moment, Thales felt a surge of coldness in his heart. If you still have any uncertainties, go ask Gilbert. And then, Kessel V, the 39th Supreme King of Constellation, the Southern Island, and the Western Desert, left Mindy's hall without looking back. His cloak disappeared from Thales' sight. Damn it. Thales lowered his head and fixed his stare at the expensive black floor tiles with a tight frown. Is this really the sire of this body, and not an enemy? Child, Thales. Gilbert, who was behind him, could not resist and silently tapped his shoulder. Do not worry and think too much about it. His Majesty just has too much on his plate. He's actually... Before Gilbert could finish his sentence, Yodel suddenly walked forward and crouched down before Thales. He took out Thales JC's dagger, which had somehow, at some point, gotten into his hands. Gilbert's expression changed. He touched his waist and knitted his brows, and softly placed it in Thales' hands. Thales snapped out of his thoughts and was slightly stunned. The head behind the dark purple mask nodded slightly, and a hoarse voice slowly said, Relax. You are his son, related by blood, bound together by fate. Nothing and no one can change this. Thales sucked in a deep breath. They probably misunderstood. Did they think that I'm feeling disappointed because my father ignored me? He kept his dagger and clenched his fists tightly, forcing out a smile. Don't worry. He suppressed the dissatisfaction in his heart and spoke plainly, thank you both. Looking at Yodel, who had cut his words off with his actions, Gilbert exhaled from his nose in displeasure. He, also, crouched down in front of Thales and spoke gently, my young Sir Thales, you have experienced too much tonight. What you need now is rest, and perhaps treatment. Thales, please come with me. Yodel, I will look for you later. We need to talk. Thales nodded and obediently followed Gilbert. Yodel, who was left alone, raised his head and looked at a vase that was placed in the corridor some distance away. Using his sharp and frightening gaze, he observed that thin cracks that were barely noticeable had appeared on the vase. Yodel furrowed his brows slightly behind his mask. He knew that before Thales had growled angrily, the vase was still in perfect condition. Was it a coincidence? Chapter 19, Anomaly and Rebirth. Wu Qiren was sitting in the classroom, his hands flying across the keyboard, speedily recording the discussion between two other students. Enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-incurred immaturities such as laziness and cowardice. When Kant described enlightenment, he emphasized that every single person possesses reason, a universal reason. The other student answered with his pleasant voice, universal reason, which stems from enlightenment, has been unearthed and utilized to its maximum potential, which is why our current era was formed. Reason is supreme, limitless, eternal. It can give us unprecedented power. Having heard this, Wu Qiren removed his hands from the keyboard and furrowed his brows. Although he was usually gentle and polite, he directly cut the student off. He raised his head and spoke, perhaps you have not read Foucault's view on the relationship between power and truth, and Heidegger's view on technology. However, he did not continue speaking, because when he saw the person sitting in front of him clearly, he was so shocked he could not speak. Sitting opposite Wu Qiren was the air mystic Asta Sekern, with his long brown hair, blue shirt, and elegant demeanor. The other party looked at him gently and spoke with a pleasant voice, if a limitless power and an all-encompassing form of reasoning exists in this world, Thales, do you not desire it? Thales jolted up from his bed. In the dark, he held onto JC's dagger tightly, which was under his pillow. Drenched in cold sweat, he panted. Thales turned over and jumped down from his bed. He only remembered where he was when his bare feet touched the expensive, heated tiles, and his nasal cavity filled with pleasant, calming perfume. The wounds on his chest and other body parts were itchy and painful under the bandages and plasters. This made him a lot more alert and calmed his breathing. He placed JC's dagger under his pillow once more. Still badly shaken, he laid back down on the huge bed that was enough for 20 Thales to sleep in. Thales was not used to the friction of the silk pajamas against his body. The bed had many springs at the core and its surface was soft and smooth, molding into Thales' framing submissively as he laid down on it. He was wrapped tightly in a Northland, goose-down blanket that was covered in silk. A smooth, silk pillow, imported from the southern coast, propped up his head and shoulders. At that moment, Thales felt like something was squeezing him from top to bottom. It was as though the air mystic had wrapped him in a layer of air and was slowly compressing him. Thales felt worried thinking about this. He pushed back the extremely light, smooth, and comfortable blanket before he stood on the ground again. Fumbling about, he found a corner, curled himself up, and lied down there. The rigid and hard floor, as well as the thick and solid walls, gave him a familiar sense of safety. Having done this, Thales slowly exhaled and chuckled in resignation. I can't believe that this is happening. He knocked on the solid floor tiles and let out a self-deprecating laugh. I miss the little guys in the 6th house so much. I hope Jayla is taking good care of them. Tomorrow, I have to talk to Gilbert about this. Even if he can't contact them directly, he could at least be able to keep an eye on them in secret. However, because of the fragment of memory he just recovered through his dream, his previously relaxed mood immediately became tense again. Dreams are reflections of the subconscious. These memories of his past life were probably the most deeply hidden fragments within his subconscious. However, this time, even Asta Sekern appeared in his dreams. As expected, I still care a lot about what that lunatic said, Thales mumbled in the dark. His short encounter with the mystic a few hours ago flashed through his mind. The mystic's actions, which were sometimes rational and sometimes completely random, his mysterious ability, an immortal body that was almost inhuman made him shiver. And what he said, child. Looks like you do not know your own nature. This sentence appeared again in his tired mind. Thales forced himself to get rid of additional and unnecessary emotions of worry and fear, then calmed down to analyze the mystic's words. Based on what Asta meant, I am just like him, a mice no, just a person who has the potential to become a mystic. Based on Asta's behavior, people with this kind of potential are quite rare. For me, this is a positive thing. But from what I can see currently, mystics don't seem to be very welcome in this world. Asta's words were way too subjective, but if part of what Asta said about the so-called battle between mystics and humans is true, mystics would be a hated existence who cannot show their faces to the world. Also, Thales thought worriedly, Asta's body. After his heart was pierced through, the wound shone with blue light. Is he really not a human anymore? And Yodel Kato. According to what he said, he must have arrived at the abandoned house very early on, so he must have heard Asta's words. Thales clenched his fists. Does he also know that I lost control in front of the mystic? If Yodel knows, does it mean that Gilbert and King Kessel would know about it too? How would they look upon me? There are many other riddles. such as my neurotic, unusually cold, and extremely suspicious father, who is also a king, the fact that although I'm only 7 years old, the bloodline lamp which is blessed with divine art, was from 12 years ago, my origin, surname, and significance towards the kingdom, why the news of my return is treated with such secrecy, so much so that Gilbert and Yodel practically smuggled me back like thieves. And what's up with this world? A medieval way of life? A world where magic is common? Steampunk? Thales tapped his head. No, I can't figure anything out. My basic understanding of this world is still too little. I need a comprehensive course that starts from basic knowledge and would provide a child with rudimentary knowledge. Thales exhaled in resignation. His gaze immediately turned solemn. Things like gaining rudimentary knowledge and learning can be done slowly. But there was one matter that had to be resolved, the matter related to his life and body. He recalled the mystic's words again, child. Looks like you do not know your own nature. But never mind. Everyone will experience a first in losing control over themselves, and we all start from ignorance. Thales clasped his hands in the dark and recalled the incidents where he lost control. When Asda compressed me inside a layer of air using mystic energy and prepared to squeeze me into a ball, my whole body boiled as if it was burning. I saw the energy ball in his hand. It must be the so-called air wall. The energy ball became red and suddenly appeared in front of me. And then wait. Thales might have found a crucial point in the matter. Blood, and the burning sensation. Thales slowly sat up. Quide. The name flashed past his mind. He had experienced this blood-boiling sensation before. It was during the 2 consecutive times Quide abused him and brutally beat him up. The similarity between those 2 incidents and his encounter with Asda was the fact that he bled. Before this, Thales thought that the burning sensation within his body was due to the so-called divine art that Gilbert mentioned, triggered by his blood falling onto the ground. Now, it seemed like the incidents where he lost control coincided with the occurrence of the burning sensation. Thales was suddenly aware that he did not lose control for the first time in front of Asda. In truth, he lost control for the first time in front of Quide. When Quide tried to kill Coria, that bastard should have been holding on to JC's dagger. How did that dagger suddenly appear in my hand? It was as strange as that energy ball suddenly appearing in front of me. Quide. Bleeding. Burning sensation. Dagger. Asda. Energy ball. Yodel and Gilbert. Bloodline lamp. Thales shut his eyes. He realized that he could not sort out these disorderly elements. Too messy. Too chaotic. However, he was not discouraged. Instead, a surge of excitement that had not appeared within him since a long time ago rose in his heart. Classify the chaotic and complicated phenomena, postulate a hypothetical and theoretical framework, eliminate the irrelevant variables, and then sum up the causal logic. Lastly, verify the completeness of the theory. And then, there are the uncertainties that can never be authenticated, the endogeneity that can never be eliminated, and the quasi-experimental research method as well as the counterfactual analysis that will never be able to approach perfection. Isn't this one of those fascinating social science riddles that can never be explained perfectly? Was that not also once my favorite game? Besides, this time, what I'm facing isn't a multi-causal, social phenomenon that I can neither do anything about nor test and verify. It's a single problem happening to me, and I can test and verify it repeatedly. When Thales opened his eyes again in the dark, his irises were filled with the desire for a challenge. He tried to calm himself down and sort out the phenomena he was experiencing. There are too few samples, too many variables, and the mechanism is too simple. The overly complicated qualitative comparative analysis, QCA, cannot be used. I can just use the most basic Mills methods of induction. First of all, with bleeding and losing control as the keywords, select relevant cases and events. He slowly shut his eyes. The familiar feeling rushed back into his mind. All the disorderly elements and factors were speedily being configured within his consciousness. According to the purpose of research in the time sequence, establish different conditions, not reasons, for each sample. See if the outcome appears. Various incidents appeared past his mind in a flash. Eliminate incident samples with too many missing values, assemble each incident's condition and outcome and then differentiate them based on their level and type. A clear and organized table appeared in his mind. For incident samples that could be observed and compared were arranged inside. Sample 1. Condition 1. 1. Quite beat me up for the first time. Condition 1. 2. Bleeding. Outcome 1. There was no anomaly. Sample 2. Condition 2. 1. Quite beat me up for the second time and was about to kill Coria. Condition 2. 2. Bleeding. Outcome 2. Lost control and the dagger appeared in my hand out of thin air. Sample 3. Condition 3. 1. Asda was about to kill me. Condition 3. 2. Bleeding. Outcome 3. Lost control and his energy ball appeared before me. Sample 4. Condition 4. 1. I validated my bloodline in front of Yodel, Gilbert, and the lamp. Condition 4. 2. Bleeding. Outcome 4. There was no anomaly. Enumeration over, comparison begins. Seek similarities and differences, categorize and conclude. The table was slowly simplified and normalized before they were merged together to form a passage of text. Thales opened his eyes gently. Conclusion: when incidents that threaten life happen along with bleeding, there is a chance that the so-called losing of control would take place, and surrounding items or energy would be displaced to different extents. No, this conclusion is too tentative. Firstly, the sample size is still too small. Next, certain disturbance variables cannot be eliminated. Also, incidents that threaten life seem too far-fetched. It might be a false mechanism. Could it be that the incidents that threaten life triggered something else, and thus was the actual trigger to the loss of control? I must also think of a way to factor the lamp in. Lastly, I have only managed to prove that those incidents are correlated. The grounds for causal reasoning are still inadequate. No matter what. Thales turned over and laid down. When it comes to losing control, there is at least a tentative conclusion now. As for the next step for the direction of the research dash. Thales exhaled, suddenly feeling the fatigue in his mind. As expected, he furiously rubbed his temples. It's still too much of a burden for a 7-year-old brain to think about these things, huh? However, he immediately realized with surprise that something was wrong. All those logical inductions and deductions, they should have at least been jotted down on a piece of draft paper with a pen. But, in actuality, the entire process of implementation for this analysis had only taken a split second in my mind. After a long while, Thales tapped the floor, feeling the pain in his head. As expected, from having mystic abilities and losing control, to possessing the so-called bloodline, and this monstrous capacity for cognitive processes, this body and this brain are abnormal. As Thales contemplated, he slowly drifted off into dreamland. When Thales was woken up politely by Gilbert, he realized that he was back on the bed and was wrapped up neatly in the blanket. My esteemed young Sir Thales, good day. Gilbert respectfully drew open the drapes. The afternoon sun shone in through the huge window, brightening up the luxurious and comfortable room. Magnificent heated tiles with pictures of stars on them, a reclining sofa made of monitor lizard skin, a spacious four-poster bed made of copper, a huge crystal drop chandelier hanging from the roof, and a veneer fireplace, all those appeared before Thales' eyes. All of which constantly reminded him that his life was different now. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago, he was a little child beggar in a gang whose life hung on a thread and who lived in constant danger. And now, he was the blood relative of the highest ruler in all of Constellation. It is 2 in the afternoon right now. I sincerely suggest that you wake up and take your meal now, as it will effectively boost your body's recovery and maintenance. The middle-aged noble was speaking with a neutral tone, but Thales could sense that he was urging him. Also, Gilbert blinked amicably and spoke with a smile. Due to His Majesty's wishes, our first lesson shall begin in the afternoon. I believe that you must have many questions, and I am very willing to answer them for you. Thales rubbed his eyes and yawned while he stripped the uncomfortable silk pajamas. He fumbled about as he simply put on the informal attire nobles usually wore, which Gilbert had prepared for him. Great, he squinted and said lazily, I love having lessons. And? Thales shut his eyes and thought silently. I was having a good sleep. Who got me off the floor and placed me on the bed again? Sir Thales, you must like these pants very much. What? Because you are putting them over your head. What? What sort of pants look like these? Sir Thales, you look like you harbor a special affection for this button coat too. Oh, this is a coat to be worn outside? Sir Thales, I think you would need the belt to your left. Ah, thank you. I was wondering why it kept falling down. After a long time, Sir Gilbert. Yes? Please put these damn clothes on for me. Gladly, my esteemed young Sir Thales. Chapter 20, Red Constellation, 1. Conspiracies and Tricks. Evil and Ugliness. A lot of them are born in the secret chambers lurking in the dark. However, conspiracies can also be forged under daylight. Such as now. As winter approached, on the afternoon of the 16th of November. In a spacious stud farm, an old noble who was bulky and fat stood under a parasol wearing a thick mink cape. His head was lowered and he was frowning. While watching a few horse trainers train the horses, he struggled to listen to what another noble to his left was saying. After a long while, he slowly heaved a sigh and, watching a disobedient horse some distance away, he puckered his lips. What sort of royal treasure has disappeared that it warrants our esteemed king to seal off Mindy's Hall for an indefinite period? What a pity. I was planning to visit Mindy's Hall next week to take a look at Master Colvin's posthumous work. The noble next to him was younger and slimmer with a relaxed expression. He raised up the aloeswood pipe in his hand with effortless ease and took a deep drag. Also, Gilbert rushed overnight to Mindy's Hall to report to His Majesty regarding the situation for the gang battle in the lower city districts, he said cheerfully while blowing smoke rings. Really? Since when does our esteemed Iron Fist King care about the fate of the outcasts in the lower city districts? If only His Majesty treated his people with half the benevolence and kindness of our late King 80, the bulky noble touched his thighs with deep hatred and resentment as the incorrigible horse fell on its forehooves. Why do we need to meet at a stud farm? The king's faction is definitely planning something. I can guarantee that it is certainly not a trivial matter, it is perhaps something that can turn the tables over in one stroke. The pipe-puffing young noble's gaze was radiating with energy. Mindy's Hall is such a good place. Having lost a royal treasure, hopefully it is not Master Colvin's artwork, the security there must have been tightened. The old noble had suddenly blurted out something that made no sense. However, the young noble nodded in understanding. I also have news that Gilbert was ordered to investigate the truth behind the burglary, and as of late, he will be visiting Mindy's Hall frequently. With that man around, even the White Eagle can't do anything. We can probe, But we shouldn't go too far. We have to use other methods to disrupt their plans. The young noble inhaled another mouthful of top-grade Fisola tobacco, of which only 600 pounds was produced each year. He reveled in it for a moment and blew a perfect smoke ring. Next month, the Extet diplomat group will be arriving at our kingdom's territory. At that moment, the old noble's face showed sincere worry. It had not been easy for Constellation and Extet to achieve a state of peace. That is true. Compared to his elder, the young noble could not retain his composure. His aggression, will, and spirit showed. If any accident happens to the diplomat group within our kingdom's territory, Our Majesty will probably be forced to act passively when he faces pressure from within and outside the kingdom. If Our Majesty does not handle it appropriately. The old noble watched as the horse from a distance away got up. He exhaled in relief, drank a mouthful of tea and spoke in resignation. As expected, a kingdom like ours where the crown is inherited is a backward one. The two of them were silent for a while. The old noble shifted his body and asked distractedly, "What is going on in the Western District?" "Do not ask me, sir. You know that I hate mystics the most." "All right. Then shall we talk about the Blackstreet Brotherhood? Those people still refuse to reveal anything." The young noble's countenance suddenly became displeased. After being around for only around 10 years, they already have such a big ego. Presumably, their confidence in their backer, whoever it is higher than their confidence in our new star. Do not look down on young people. The old man cracked a smile in resignation. His eyes shone with sagacity and sharpness. When children do terrifying things, that is true horror. Compared to the quick glances he threw the day before during the previous night and at dawn, Mindy's hall now looked bigger, more magnificent and, of course, emptier in the afternoon in Thales' eyes. The ground floor housed a large parlor, a large banquet hall, and an open-air garden. The place was also equipped with a large-scale scullery and basement storehouse. There was even a depository for military equipment. Apart from the open-air balcony, where a full view of the outdoor garden can be seen, due to considerations for your safety, I do not recommend that you appear on the balcony or outdoors within the month. Gilbert, the huge first floor had 3 large-scale rooms with different functions, the noble banquet hall, the assembly hall, and the games room. There were also rooms of various sizes. The corridors, exits, and entrances of the ground floor and first floor were full of dignified, armored guards, all of them positioned themselves while following the protocol of 1 sentry every 10 steps. Their faces were hidden behind full-face helmets and every single one of them looked as intimidating as large statues. Although they are swordsmen of eradication that belong privately to the Jadestar family, I still do not recommend that you poke their stomachs, young Sir Thales, Gilbert. However, from a distance, Mindy's hall still looked eerily quiet and empty. Thales' living room, bedroom, dining room, and study room, where lessons were conducted, were on the second floor. The second floor was only accessible from the first floor, through a crowded fleet of stairs. Moreover, 8 fully equipped swordsmen of eradication were guarding the place at full attention, changing shifts every 6 hours. As for the area outside the windows and the roof, he heard that there were also guards that were stationed outdoors, with Yodel around. You do not need to worry about threats from beyond the window, Gilbert. Every single dish, from broccoli and bread to beef and plain water, was taken from the strictly guarded scullery in the basement storehouse where they were prepared. Pardon me, I have no way of ensuring their freshness, Gilbert. From cooking to delivery, the dishes had to go through stringent poison treatment, pre-libation, and poison testing procedures. These safety and security measures are really beyond human imagination. It seems that I'm a lot more important than I thought I was. Should I say something like, as expected of the ruling class? I wonder if Jayla is able to sneak in with her skills. What about a mystic? Speaking of such. No, this is out of the question. Pardon me for refusing, young sir. Thales raised his head to look at Gilbert, giving him a questioning look. So far, everything related to you is kept confidential. Gilbert shook his head firmly. Pardon me for speaking bluntly. We have already sealed off Mindy's hall. Our communication with the outside world is limited to a few trusted oath-keepers. Under this situation, for the royal family to suddenly dispatch troops to a gang in the lower city district in search of 3 child beggars in hiding, whether it is to monitor or to assist them, would be extremely detrimental to both parties. Although the gang is nothing to us, actions that are too flashy would alert our true enemies and provide them with an opportunity to seize our weakness. Do not look down on the capabilities of those with malicious intentions. With the slightest clue, they would be able to reel silk from cocoons and find the source. He said in a deep voice, to help your old friends, we have to at least wait for the right opportunity. Thales heaved a sigh and frowned, eating the last mouthful of buttered bread. It was sweet and greasy. He immediately took his cup and drank a mouthful of red tea. At least the food is much better. If you are satisfied with the afternoon tea. With impeccable etiquette, Gilbert took the teacup from the frantic Thales and bowed slightly. He continued, we shall begin our afternoon lessons. In truth, while maintaining a smile, Gilbert muttered in his mind, perhaps we should begin with dining etiquette? How about Yodel? Where is he? As a competent protector, he would naturally be on guard somewhere nearby. Thales resisted the instinctive urge to look around. Once he knew that Yodel was nearby, he somehow felt a lot more at ease. And so Thales tugged the bow tie on his neck that was making him uncomfortable and followed the slightly frowning Gilbert into the study. First of all, Thales, I spoke to Yodel yesterday. Gilbert watched as Thales positioned himself on a leather chair and curiously looked around at the decorations of the study, especially the 3 filled bookshelves. You are an extraordinary child. I can see that, based on Yodel's assessment, and the few hours I spent with you since we met each other. Here it is. Thales maintained a curious expression, but he raised his guard. However, this goes without saying, the heir of Constellation is naturally special. Gilbert placed his hands behind his back and slowly walked towards the study table, which was carved with the symbol of the nine-pointed star. At that moment, his grayish-white sideburns made him look especially solemn. I believe that since fate has returned you to Constellation, she must have her own arrangements. Thales looked at the middle-aged noble and said nothing. I vaguely know about your past. The days on the streets must have been difficult. But please forget about them. Gilbert picked up the book that had been placed a long time ago on the black, aloeswood study table. He turned around and said gravely, you will have a new identity, a new life, and even a new name. However, the most important thing would be the future you have to face and the burden that you will have to shoulder from this future. Gilbert's piercing gaze looked into Thales' gray irises. Forget the past. Thales meditated to himself. He looked at Gilbert's sharp eyes and nodded with a solemn expression. How is that possible? Thales mocked in his heart. I understand. So, Thales weighed his words and spoke slowly, what does the me right now need to know about myself and my past? Gilbert's expression did not change, but in his heart, he nodded slightly. Anxiousness, fear, helplessness, all the emotions that should be felt by a 7-year-old child under this kind of situation, are absent from this child. There is only calmness and caution. Even his excitement is minimal. He is indeed extraordinary. Is it due to the tough trials and tribulations he faced in the Brotherhood? Yodel refused to explain in detail, but the assassin was full of praises for this child. However, does being in a gang in the lower city district really give someone this kind of experience? Or should I say that the royal bloodline that descended from the ancient empires, with almost 3,000 years of history, is indeed extraordinary? Or maybe, his other half. Having thought of this, Gilbert furrowed his brows a little, but the competent noble still bowed slightly. My esteemed young Sir Thales, please allow me to regard you as such for the moment. You are 7 years old this year. On the 25th of July in the year 665, you were born in Mon Manor, which is on the outskirts of Constellation's capital city, Eternal Star City. Your biological mother is a noble lady, whose name shall not be disclosed because it is not convenient for us to do so. She passed away from excessive bleeding while giving birth to you. Before taking her last breath, she named you Thales, after the brightest star in the sky. Thales furrowed his brows slightly. You grew up under the secret care of the Jade Star family in Mon Manor. I, and another female official visited you occasionally. During that period, you grew up as a child adopted by Lord Mon while he was hunting outside and did not know about your true identity. Last year in December, Lord Mon died in battle on the border of the Western Deserts. Due to his lack of an heir, his assets and territories were retrieved by the monarch. At the same time, I brought you back to Mindy's Hall, which is in the Twilight District. Thales kept quiet and listened to the entire narration. And next month, Gilbert held the book in his hand tightly, as the king, Kessel V's illegitimate child, a member of the Constellation royal family, and the only surviving blood relative of the Jade Star family, you will be declaring your birthright. Then the royal family, Sunset Temple, and the upper house of Constellation will jointly recognize you as. Gilbert's expression was imposing and solemn. There were also slight hints of worry and sadness. The heir of Constellation's supreme king. After a long time, Thales exhaled lightly. Looks like it's way more complicated than what I imagined. I get it. There are some parts that I'm still unclear about, but I will remember it firmly. I used to be Thales who grew up in Mon Manor, and was also Lord Mon's adopted child. Thales' eyes sparkled, and he propped up his hands before placing his chin on them. His thoughts were being configured speedily. He grouped the information he already had in what Gilbert said, into various elements and converted them into valid information. Gilbert nodded and sat on a leather chair opposite Thales. For the remaining parts, I will provide the details for you to memorize and familiarize yourself with. Right now, this is your only task, and also all that you need to know. As expected, although he respects me very much, deep down, he feels that there's no need to tell a 7-year-old child so much. Thales' eyes sparkled. Next, I need to know your basics when it comes to. As Gilbert was contemplating the lesson he should provide Thales with next, of whether he should start with basic etiquette or languages, the heir of Constellation suddenly opened his mouth and interrupted him. So, we have decided on a common excuse for the people outside. Thales, who was curling up in the leather chair, raised his chin from his hands. His gaze shone with bright light. It should be time to tell me the truth, along with the predicament the king is in, and our common enemies and allies, whether public or those lying in the dark. Gilbert was slightly stunned. For example, my birth mother's identity and why her identity is, not to be divulged, Constellation's difficult current state of affairs, especially the series of problems brought about by the royal succession. Perhaps you should tell me all of the above in detail so that I won't harbor any uncertainties when it comes to my future lessons. I will also be able to choose and prioritize the knowledge I need to learn. I believe that for the sake of Constellation, and also your king, this is the best choice. As soon as he finished speaking, the middle-aged noble's jaw dropped slightly. He looked at Thales in surprise. Did Yodel talk to him about all this? No, it's impossible. Thales retracted his hands. With a calm expression, he coolly but determinedly waited for Gilbert's answer. At that moment, Gilbert felt like he was looking at the young Kessel 80 Jade Star. At that time, Prince Kessel's eyes had been sparkling like stars. The warm rays of light in his eyes had not yet become the bone-chilling northern wind. Gilbert only remained dazed for a moment before he immediately snapped out of his stupor and heaved a small sigh. An extraordinary child, huh? Beginning from that moment, the middle-aged noble answered his young master with true reverence and respect. I understand. I will explain them to you immediately. In order to save up whatever limited time we have, if you have any other queries, you may also raise them now. Thales frowned slightly. Very well. He propped up his body from the comfortable leather chair that he was unaccustomed to. Then I will be more straightforward. Thales activated the extraordinary cognitive capacity of his mind and pulled up all the relevant information. Just like how he used to do when organizing relevant literature for his research, he summed up all the key points. You mentioned before that the Bloodline lamp was blessed with divine art 12 years ago, but I am only 7 years old. Why did your people prepare the tools to search for blood relatives from 12 years ago? I believe that this is related to my birth mother, whose identity cannot be divulged. Who is she? Why did she leave me with the gang after giving birth to me 7 years ago? These questions can be categorized under where am I from? And Kessel, my father, is still in the prime of his life. What is the reason for Constellation not having an heir for 12 years? Why has all hope for an heir been placed on an illegitimate child of unknown origin? There is something wrong with my father's attitude towards me. If it's not a problem with his personal attitude, then I'll have to ask. What is his relationship with my mother? Why is my identity such a secret? These questions can be categorized under who am I? Lastly, what does my existence mean to Constellation? Without an heir, what kind of problems would Constellation face? Who are our enemies, and who are our allies? According to what you said, Sunset Temple plays an important role in the matters related to me. How is this related to them? If I am acknowledged, or even if I just make a public appearance in the kingdom, what would be the state of affairs we would have to face? As an illegitimate son, what are my rights? As an heir, what would I be inheriting? These questions can be categorized under where am I headed to in my future? Where am I from, who am I, and where am I headed to in my future? Sir Gilbert, please answer these 3 queries for me. It was as though time stopped at that moment. Gilbert stared hard at the boy before him. From out of nowhere, a rush of surprise and fear appeared in his heart. Late kings from ancient ages, late kings of Constellation. He sighed from the bottom of his heart. Is this boy your descendant? What kind of power is hidden within your bloodline? After a long moment, the middle-aged noble uttered a sentence with slight difficulty, Sir Thales. He exhaled and organized his words. You are definitely unlike a 7-year-old child. Thales immediately realized that what he had just said was inappropriate, but there was already no way for him to back down. Whatever, being a child prodigy who is familiar with the ways of the world is definitely better than being a clueless puppet. More than one person had said this before, if you want to get into my good books, you will have to word it more creatively, Mr. Gilbert. To mitigate Gilbert's expression, Thales answered with a rare show of humor and cracked a smile. Gilbert did not reply. He just cast Thales a deep look, not averting his gaze for a long time. Just as Thales wondered whether time had stopped, the middle-aged noble, who was as still as a statue, suddenly opened his mouth and began to answer his queries. My esteemed Sir Thales, firstly, where you are from, everything began 12 years ago. In the March of the year 660, although the late King 82 was already of old age, he was still king. His reign was long-standing and steady, the people knew him as the king of eternal rule. However, due to an increasingly fierce rebellion, the whole of Constellation sunk into an unprecedented turmoil. It even affected the entire Western Peninsula. War, disaster, famine, those were the issues of that year. A lot of people referred to that year as Bloody Year. Amidst the chaos and bloodshed, King 80 was murdered. Almost the entire Jadestar royal family was slaughtered. Among all the legitimate members of the royal family, only his 5th son, Prince Kessel Jadestar, survived. At that time, he was 35 years old. In the end, he was crowned as king. That was your father, Kessel V, known as the Iron Hand King among the people.